I'm sharing this because I haven't found a better outlet yet, and I don't want anyone close to me knowing what I've been dealing with. I've tried ignoring the whole situation, but it hasn't gone away in my mind, and the more that time passes, the more that I feel like I should at least record it somewhere. I'm not asking for conclusions. I just want to place and state the facts the way that I remember them. So, the events began roughly 21 months ago when I was living on a ground floor unit of an older duplex. For my entire life, I barely remembered dreams, let alone frightening ones. So when the first episode started, I didn't have any reference point for what was normal and what wasn't. The initial dreams always had the same structure though. I wasn't in my real home, but in an unfamiliar interior space, rooms that looked like rentals or temporary housing or something. In these dreams, something that resembled a person would approach me, but its proportions were off. The limbs were human, but the head was shaped like an animal's. The details changed each time as well. Sometimes it looked vaguely canine and sometimes more like a big cat, but it never looked fully natural. I won't go into all of the specifics, but the encounters became increasingly intrusive and physical, and I would wake up feeling panicked all the time. But one dream in particular stood out. In it, I was staying in a small hostel somewhere that I didn't recognize. The entire place was painted an odd burnt yellow color though. A voice I couldn't locate said, "You shouldn't stay here." When I stepped into an adjoining room, one of those figures was standing near the bed. It moved toward me and told me that I couldn't leave, and the moment that I tried to create distance, it appeared directly in front of me without any transition, and that was when I woke up. I realized that I had been sleeping on my back, and as I sat up, I felt a sudden pressure fade off of my chest, like somebody had been leaning on me. When I looked in the mirror, I had several thin scratches across my ribs, shoulders, and even on the sides of my neck. They weren't deep, but they were too defined to be random marks. I didn't own any pets, I didn't sleep near anything sharp, and I've chewed my nails down since childhood, so I couldn't have done it accidentally. I didn't know what else to do, so I went upstairs and I woke my father up. He stays in the upper unit of the duplex, and it was just after sunrise. I didn't tell him everything, only that I had some kind of a really weird night episode and I couldn't calm down. That pattern, though, continued. The dreams became frequent and the scratches kept appearing. I started sleeping in short intervals because I didn't want to enter a deep sleep cycle anymore. The more exhausted I became as well, the worse the episodes seemed to get. Eventually, the only person that I confided in, someone that I've known for years, suggested I play continuous religious audio while sleeping. Not for spiritual reasons, but more so because he said that repetitive sound might interrupt whatever cycle my brain was stuck in. I didn't expect anything, but I tried it. And, to my surprise, the dreams stopped almost immediately. I didn't have a single episode for weeks, in fact. Then, one night, something changed again. I woke up abruptly at around 2:40 in the morning. The audio was still playing as it always did. I remember sitting still for a few seconds trying to figure out why I'd woken up so sharply. Then I heard heavy, fast footsteps moving inside of my room. Not faint or imagined, they were distinct, as if someone weighing far more than me was running in short bursts around the room. Around my bed, even. I needed to confirm I was actually awake, so I grabbed a cold bottle of water from the nightstand and poured it over my head and chest. I remember how cold it was, and I remember the shock. I also remember that the footsteps didn't stop when I did that. I completely froze. I couldn't move or talk. I just listened. The footsteps eventually stopped near the door, and then a different noise started. Rapid, forceful hits against the old wooden shutters that opened to the backyard. It wasn't random tapping as well. It was deliberate and rhythmic, like someone pounding with both hands. No one that I knew would have been outside my unit at that time as well. The yard itself is enclosed with an old fence and a locked gate, but after maybe 30 seconds of the banging, everything went quiet except for the audio playing on the phone. I didn't move. I kept staring at the ceiling, and then, right next to my left ear, a low voice said, "No," drawn out and distorted. It didn't sound like a person speaking normally. It sounded strained and almost mechanical in a way. Immediately after that, though, all the activity just stopped. No more scratches appeared after that night, no more animal-headed figures, the dreams returned to normal, and I've tried to rationalize it, believe me. Sleep paralysis, hallucinations, stress responses, those are the explanations that I've read, but I've also had sleep paralysis once before in my life, years ago, and the physical marks and the sounds inside of my room, they don't line up with how that typically works. I know that memory can distort things, but the core parts feel too clear for me to just dismiss like that. I still live in the same place. I still think about that night every time that I have a bad dream. I haven't told anyone else besides the friend that I mentioned. I'm not trying to make this into something supernatural. Honestly, I hope that there's a normal explanation, but nothing so far has fit what happened. Anyway, that's all I wanted to document, and if anyone out there has something even remotely similar to this, I would love to know about it, only so that I don't feel like I imagined the whole thing, and also so I just don't feel so alone. Between roughly 2006 and 2008, when I was living with my family in a suburban house, I experienced repeated visual episodes that did not align with normal childhood imagination. From ages 4 to 6, I frequently reported seeing figures or shapes that were not present. Adults treated it as typical childhood behavior, and eventually the episode stopped entirely. For nearly 2 years, there was nothing unusual. When I was 8, the experiences resumed without warning, though. The first incident is the one that I remember the best. I was sitting on the living room couch one afternoon. The couch faced a narrow hallway that led to the bedrooms. I looked up and I saw a child-sized figure sitting in the floor in the hallway, positioned against the wall. The figure appeared female and roughly my age or maybe slightly younger. She wore what looked like a long sleep garment that was discolored and damaged in several places. Her posture was rigid and withdrawn, with her knees pulled to her chest and her head lowered. Her hair was long and dark, lying flat in a way that didn't behave like normal hair. Her skin tone appeared unnaturally muted, not transparent or glowing, but lacking the warmth of a living person almost. She didn't speak or move while I was looking at her, and after a minute or two I looked away and looked back and she was gone. After that first sighting, similar episodes occurred repeatedly over the next 2 weeks. The same figure appeared in multiple locations: the hallway, the kitchen, my bedroom, and even in some public places such as a grocery store and a sidewalk. These appearances were brief, but they were frequent. Sometimes the figure was stationary, other times it appeared to move behind me or reappear closer after disappearing from view. But one incident stands out the most. I was sitting on the couch again when I noticed the figure several feet away, and it disappeared and then reappeared closer without any visible movement between positions. That caused an immediate panic response. I screamed and called for my older sibling. When she entered the room, the figure was no longer there. Another occurrence happened late in the evening while I was in the kitchen preparing food one day. The figure appeared standing near the doorway, facing me directly. I remember sort of freezing and staring back, and when I blinked, it was gone. What made these experiences different from nightmares or imagination, though, was consistency. The figure always appeared the same way. The behavior never changed. There was no communication, no overt threat, and no comforting presence either. The emotional response was persistent fear rather than curiosity. At the time, I also reported seeing other types of visual disturbances: shapes without faces, blurred human outlines, dark silhouettes, pale outlines too, and shifting patches of color, I guess you could say. These were not as specific or reoccurring as the child figure, but they occurred often enough to be noted. No medical evaluation was performed, and the episodes eventually stopped again without any explanation. Now, years later as an adult, I revisited these memories during a conversation with my father. This occurred around 2024, while discussing childhood experiences in that same house, and I asked him generally whether he remembered me claiming to see things as a child. And he responded by sharing his own experiences from that period. Without prompting or description from me, he mentioned that he had repeatedly noticed what he described as a small child moving through the hallway of the house. He said the figure appeared briefly, often running or passing through the peripheral vision, and always disappeared when he tried to focus on it. He did recall, though, it wearing a light-colored garment and having dark hair. Only after he finished did I ask clarifying questions, and his answers matched the details that I remembered exactly, including the location and general appearance and everything. This was the first time that I learned that he had experienced anything similar to me, and it was just not something discussed while we lived there. This information didn't resolve anything, obviously, and it didn't confirm a cause or an explanation for any of it. It only removed one possibility: that the experience was entirely fabricated or remembered incorrectly. There were no further incidences after we moved out of that house, thankfully, and I don't interpret this as proof of anything beyond the fact that something was perceived repeatedly by more than one person in the same environment over the same period of time. Whether the cause was psychological, environmental, or something else entirely is still pretty unclear to me. What remains unsettling, though, is not what it was, but, like I said, just how consistent this whole thing was, and I guess just how little attention it received at the time. When I first started working at a small research facility, I didn't expect to spend much time alone. The engineering division was usually busy, but during the winter break the entire building was nearly empty, with most staff away. I was one of the few new hires, so I stayed back to finish setting up an older mobile robotics platform that needed to be evaluated before the next semester. My role there was an automation technologist. The project involved testing a wheeled robot that used a depth camera on an old sensor that behaved similarly to Kinect, to map out human positions in real time. It connected to a workstation and displayed skeletal outlines whenever it detected a person. The software, it wasn't really too complicated, but it was strict about identifying shapes. If something looked remotely humanoid, the system would try to lock onto it. The room assigned to the robot, it wasn't part of the main engineering wing, though. It was a leftover office on the top floor above the composites workshop. According to one of the technicians, the entire upper area had been unused for nearly a decade now. The first time that I walked in as well, that made a lot of sense. The carpet was dated, the fluorescent tubes flickered, and there were cardboard boxes stacked against the wall that clearly had not been touched in years. When I checked the storage cupboards, there were expired lab snacks and outdated hardware still sitting where someone had left them long ago. On my first serious testing day, I powered on the robot and moved around the room to check whether the camera could reliably track me. The system responded normally at first. It drew a digital skeleton when I stepped in front of it and followed my movements. Then, midway through a calibration pass, the robot shifted its focus sharply toward a part of the room where nothing was standing. Everything about its behavior indicated, though, that it had detected a person. I moved back into its field of view and tried to get its attention. No response. The depth feed on the monitor, it showed a single stick figure sort of standing in the empty corner. I cleaned the lens, restarted the software, and walked around again, but the system ignored me entirely. After about 15 minutes of trying to troubleshoot it, I assumed the sensor had developed an artifact or the depth data had glitched or something, so I shut everything down for the day. The next afternoon I went back, planning on rewriting part of the tracking script. Before I could start editing anything though, the robot issued the audio cue that it used whenever it identified a person. It rotated on its base and directed itself toward the wall behind my workstation. I looked at the screen and I saw two stick figure outlines. One was positioned as though someone was standing with their shoulder against the wall. The other appeared higher, well, above normal standing height, aligned with the window frame at the far end of the room. The layout of that window didn't make any sense for what I was seeing, though. The sill was more than 5 meters above the ground outside, directly above heavy machinery as well. You couldn't physically reach it from outside, and no one inside of the building could have been standing there unless they were almost twice my height. When I checked behind me, there was nothing. The outlines disappeared instantly after I turned, as if the system believed that they had stepped out of view. I repeated the test twice as well to rule out reflections or environmental interference. The results were always the same though. The robot routinely detected shapes in that part of the room, but only when I wasn't looking at the monitor. Every time that I turned to check the physical space, the system dropped the figures. Now, depth sensors aren't perfect, I'll admit. They misread shadows, edges, and reflections, but this room had no mirrors, no glass except for the high window, and no heat signatures or equipment that could distort a human form outline. The data logs as well were clean as far as I could tell. No errors recorded, no fluctuations in the depth values that matched what the software claimed to be seeing. I ended up reporting the issue to my supervisor, who suggested removing the platform from that office and running it into the main lab instead. After we relocated it, the problem, it never reappeared. There were no false positives, no phantom skeletons, nothing. The system worked exactly as expected in every other environment. I never did go back to those upstairs office alone after that. There was no official explanation for what the robot identified that week too, and nobody pushed the issue further as well. In a technical issue, I guess it was just a misclassification problem, but in practical terms, I couldn't justify staying in a room where a machine insisted that there were people standing in places that could not physically be occupied. To this day, whenever I work with vision systems, I still think about those two outlines appearing behind me like that, and disappearing the moment that I turned around. When I first moved into an old unit outside of Bathurst, I didn't expect anything unusual. The place belonged to my late uncle, and my relatives had different opinions about it. One cousin claimed that the house had strange moments, but she also said a lot of dramatic things in general, so I didn't take any of it too seriously. The building was just dated, with uneven floorboards and a layout that hadn't been updated in like decades. Anyway, roughly a year after settling in, something happened that I still don't have a clear explanation for. You see, one night I woke up at around 3:40 in the morning because the blanket on top of me lifted, as if someone had pinched it from the edge and raised it. It dropped back onto me immediately, but there was no draft, no movement in the room, and nothing else made any sense. I sat there, trying to force a logical explanation out of it, but the event itself was too specific to dismiss. Nothing else in that room had shifted, and The air was still, so yeah, I don't know. Anyway, another 6 months passed without anything similar, so I practically forgot about it. But then, there was a night where things escalated in a way that I just wasn't prepared for. I was getting ready to go to sleep at around 2 in the morning, and was sitting on my bed facing the small mirror on the opposite wall. I was pretty tired, but not enough to imagine things. And as I was looking into the mirror, I suddenly felt, well, detached from what I was doing. Almost like I was operating on autopilot. It wasn't a dramatic or cinematic sort of thing, just a clear sense that my focus had shifted without my participation. At the same time, I had the strong impression that somebody else was in the room with me. Not visually and not in the way that I could measure, but the kind of awareness that you get when you know another person has entered a space. I glanced toward the small bedside shelf where I kept things like my incense holder and a few personal items. For some reason, I felt a strong urge to rearrange everything so that nothing was close to the edge. I pushed everything back neatly, even though I had never cared about that detail before. At the time, it made no sense to me, but something in my mind just insisted on doing it. After switching the light off and laying down, the sense of not being alone, it returned. It wasn't fear at first, more like a pressure, the way that a room feels when somebody else is standing quietly in a corner. While staring at the ceiling, I caught something in my peripheral vision to the left of me. It looked like a dark, uneven shape, suspended above the height of the bedside shelf. Nothing about its appearance resembled a person or an object that I recognized, and my initial reaction was to blame the low light and just sort of ignore it. But the shape, it didn't fade, and my sense of someone being there, that only intensified. About a minute later, the incense holder that I had pushed far back onto the shelf shot forward and hit the floor. Mind you, it didn't tip or slide or anything. It moved in a way that would have required so much force. And that part bothered me most because I knew exactly where I had placed it earlier. The shelf, it wasn't slanted, and there was no vibration from appliances or traffic that could account for it. But my reaction was immediate. I turned on the lamp and stayed upright. Nothing else moved. Nothing else happened. I stayed awake until sunrise because I didn't want to go back to sleep in the dark after that. There were no more incidences that night and nothing physically abnormal about the room in the morning. But both events, the blanket flicking and sort of lifting and the object being thrown like that, I know that they happened around the same time of night, months apart. I've lived in other buildings and never had anything remotely similar occur before or since then. I still don't have a clear interpretation for what happened, and I've avoided guessing because I just don't have enough information to draw a reliable conclusion. That unit has been rented out now, though, and I haven't gone back. I don't claim anything supernatural definitively, but the events were specific enough that I still think about them, and I don't rule out that possibility. Anyway, if you have any idea as to what this might have been, then I would love to hear your thoughts. In my early 30s, I went through a breakup that was long overdue. The guy that I had been seeing, his name was Mark, and he had a pattern of behavior that made the relationship more stressful than anything else. I had already made the decision to leave, but before I did, he insisted that he wanted to show me something that he considered important. His tone made it sound like he thought that this would completely change how I viewed him or something. To give context, I wasn't deeply involved in anything metaphysical at the time. I had read a few books about meditation and some general mindfulness practices, but genuinely, that was the extent of it. Mark, on the other hand, was absorbed in fringe material, out-of-body claims, occult symbolism, old conspiracy-style beliefs about spiritual entities. He was also extremely private, and during the months that we were together, I learned several things about him that made me feel uneasy. He had a bit of a history of compulsory behavior and admitted that he had a record of acting violently toward people in situations that he sought out intentionally. A lot of what he said just didn't add up to, and I suspected there was a major part of his life that I never got the truth about. In any case, when he asked me to watch him demonstrate something, I didn't feel threatened. I assumed it was another one of his attempts to make himself seem impressive or whatever. I agreed only because I wanted a clean exit, and refusing would have dragged the conversation out, so I just did it. He had us sit on the floor of his flat. He said that he was going to enter a deep meditative state while I observed him. It seemed unnecessary, but I let him go through the motions. After maybe a minute of silently sitting, he opened his eyes and looked at me. But what I saw did not match anything that I would have expected. I saw his eyes, everything, not just the iris, but all of it, appeared completely black. It was not a lighting issue. The room was evenly lit, and his appearance changed suddenly and clearly as well. At the same time, the room felt noticeably colder, but I don't know if that was environmental or just my reaction or what. He didn't speak or move, he just stared straight at me without blinking. My immediate response wasn't fear in a conventional sense. It was more like being confronted with something that didn't fit into any category of behavior that I understood. The best way to describe the impression that I got is that he seemed emotionally absent, as if there was no recognition of me as a person anymore. It was intense, to say the least, too. A focused stare that didn't match anything that I'd ever seen from him before. I don't know how long this lasted. It could have been several seconds or maybe longer. But eventually I reached forward and touched his forearm to break the moment. Under normal circumstances, he was thin and his body usually felt tense, but in that moment, he felt completely rigid, almost like he wasn't reacting physically in any normal way. There was no flinch or acknowledgement or anything. A moment later, he closed his eyes, opened them again, and they were back to normal. His posture relaxed, and he acted like nothing unusual had happened. He asked me what I thought of it, clearly expecting some kind of validation. I didn't give him the response that he wanted, and I kept it brief because I no longer wanted to continue the interaction at all. I left shortly afterward. There was no follow-up conversation, and I stopped all contact with him within the week. Looking back on it all years later, I still don't really have a definitive explanation for it too. I mean, it's possible that it was an intentional effect. Contacts, lighting tricks, self-induced disassociation, or something psychological on his part that I just wasn't equipped to interpret at the time. I can only report what I observed, not what caused it. I never did see him again after that, which I was thankful for, but anyway, it's something that has sat with me for a long time now, and really I just don't know what to make of it. So I was staying in a short-term rental during the final months of construction on my actual house. It wasn't an old place or anything unusual, just a standard 2-story home in a newer suburb. My daughter, Claire, was using the upstairs room that had originally been designed as a hobby space. It had a skylight, a small bathroom, and a large storage nook someone had apparently turned into a closet at some stage. From the landing, you could see directly into the doorway of the bathroom, too. One evening, I would say around 9 p.m, I went up there to talk to her about an issue at school. But nothing dramatic, just normal parent-child stuff, really. She was sitting on her bed, though, and I was leaning against the doorframe while explaining what she needed to do differently. While I was talking, something shifted in my peripheral vision. I looked toward the bathroom doorway without really thinking about it. And that is when I observed something that I still cannot explain in any logical framework. A tall, extremely narrow figure was standing just inside of the threshold of the bathroom. It wasn't shaped like a normal person. The outline was way too thin, almost stick-like in fact. The head was long and oval, and not in a sort of anatomical sense though, but more like a general silhouette of a head stretched vertically. Whatever it was completely black, not skin or fabric, but more like a shadow being projected into some empty space. It wasn't transparent, but it also didn't reflect any light from the hall or the skylight or anything. It genuinely looked like a cutout standing upright where nothing should exist. As soon as it seemed to recognize that I was looking directly at it too, the thing withdrew. It didn't step backwards or turn, it sort of simply snapped out of view, as if someone had pulled it straight back into the nearest dark surface. The movement was so abrupt though, and unnaturally fast. I also didn't hear anything, which was weird. I didn't react cowardly. My first thought wasn't fear, in fact, but just confusion. I didn't want to alarm Claire and create problems with her sleeping in that room, so I continued talking like nothing had happened. Maybe 2 seconds had passed, not enough time to even think it through, when Claire froze, stared toward the bathroom and yelled, "Dad, someone just went in there." And her description matched exactly what I had seen. Tall, extremely thin, completely black. She used different words than I would have, but both accounts aligned perfectly. I told her that she was mistaken because I didn't want her panicking or refusing to stay upstairs for the night. Internally, I already knew that we had both observed the same thing at almost the exact same moment as well. I checked the bathroom and the storage area. Nothing was there, and there was nowhere for anyone to hide either. The house had no connecting attic space from that room, and the only door to the upper floor was still in my line of sight the entire time. But we didn't speak about it again that night, and over the next 3 years, nothing else visually unusual happened, but my life went through a long period of setbacks, I guess you could call them. Business issues, medical problems, and a significant decline in my marriage as well. I cannot say if any of it is connected, but the timing lined up close enough that it still crossed my mind for sure. Now, I don't jump to supernatural explanations often, and I've tried to consider every rational possibility, but whatever I saw, I know for certain that it was not a person. It wasn't a reflection, and it was not a trick of the light either. It behaved like something reacting to being observed. And the fact that Claire saw it independently as well makes it harder to dismiss as a momentary visual error. I don't know what the figure was, and I don't claim that it caused anything in my life, but it remains one of the few experiences that I cannot file away under normal causes. If anyone has encountered anything similar, specifically a tall, thin, completely black figure that withdraws instantly when noticed, I would definitely be interested in hearing about it. I'm trying to understand whether this fits into any known patterns or anything, or if it is an isolated incident that I've overthought because of everything that happened afterward. A few years back, my partner and I were staying temporarily in her aunt's house on the outskirts of Ipoh, Malaysia, while some repairs were being done at our own place. We usually made that trip once every month or so, leaving early in the morning and driving home late at night. On one particular visit, though, we got home well past midnight and both of us were pretty drained from the long day, so she has a nightly routine that I've seen her follow for as long as we've been together. She recites a set of verses before sleeping and then gestures toward the bed as a type of personal protection ritual. She calls it a boundary, meaning that she visualizes a barrier so that nothing unwanted, spiritual or otherwise, crosses into the sleeping area. She normally does the sequence around the whole room, corner to corner. At the time, we were also using one of those sort of dome-style nets that hang from the ceiling. Well, we went to sleep without any conversation, and I fell into a cycle of light and deep sleep, but at some point in the early hours, I drifted into a state where I was conscious of my surroundings without being fully awake. My eyes were closed, but the awareness felt clear. But during that period as well, I sensed movement to my left. When I opened my eyes slightly, I saw a dark figure outside of the net. It didn't resemble a person in any detailed way, just an outline with no features. It moved in a manner that didn't match normal physical motion, though. The arms pushed forward and back continuously, almost like somebody forcing their way through thick water. It kept repeating the same gesture toward the net, but never made contact with me or crossed inside. The atmosphere around it felt heavy, though, noticeably negative, like being near something that shouldn't be present. And after several seconds, my awareness faded and I fell back into a deeper sleep without deciding to. The next morning, I debated whether I should mention it or not. Eventually, I did tell her, but I warned her beforehand that I didn't want to cause unnecessary worry. I explained what I saw, the way that it moved, and the sense that it was trying to get into the net but just couldn't. She didn't react with any panic. She just listened carefully and said that she was relieved that nothing actually entered. Then she walked into the kitchen, stopped halfway, and came back to the doorway with a strange look. She said that she needed to tell me something that might connect to what I had experienced. So, the night before, she had been so exhausted from the trip that she had fallen asleep without doing the full room boundary. She only remembered this when she woke up briefly in the middle of the night. Still half asleep, she made the hand gesture, only around the sleeping net and not the rest of the room. Then she fell right back asleep. We compared both accounts and realized the timing lined up. The only area that she had reinforced was the net, and the figure that I perceived stopped exactly at that point. Neither of us jumped to conclusions, but the overlap was difficult to ignore for sure. Nothing similar has happened since then, and the house itself never had any other incidences too. The most practical explanation is that the entire experience occurred in a state between dreaming and waking, I suppose, and her partial routine just happened to coincide with it. But even with that possibility, I haven't forgotten the incident. Every night, almost automatically, I remind her to go through her routine thoroughly. She usually rolls her eyes and tells me that she already knows. There's no real dramatic ending to the story, I suppose. It didn't lead to any ongoing fear or major changes in our lives, but it did leave us with a shared moment that neither of us can explain cleanly, and we still refer to it occasionally when discussing the strange things that people sometimes experience during the sort of half-conscious state before sleep. But apart from that, life goes on as normal. My family owns a large rural block on the outskirts of Ballarat in Victoria. The land has been passed down for a long time, but the current house was only built in the late 1970s after the original farmhouse burned down. According to my grandfather, the fire started with thieves when they broke in and set the place alight while fleeing. A lot of old paperwork, legends, and also some small artifacts about the property used to be stored in the first house, but most of it was lost over the years. Whatever history is left is scattered between relatives now, and nobody seems to agree on which parts are actually accurate. The property runs into several kilometers of bushland, though. I've spent most of my life walking those tracks without worrying about anything worse than a snake or maybe the occasional feral hog. But that all changed about 2 years ago. My first major event happened when my bandmate slept over after rehearsing late one night. They stayed in the den on the ground floor because that's where all the gear was set up. I took my usual room upstairs and I went to bed at around 2 in the morning, planning to get as much sleep as possible before we drove out early the next day. I was seconds from falling asleep too when a noise from the front of my house jolted me awake. The window was open because it was warm that night, and what I heard sounded like a scream, but not from someone calling for help or arguing. It was raw, loud, and strained in a way that didn't match anything that I'd heard before. Each scream lasted several seconds, and between them there was a rough, unstable breathing sound, like whatever was making it was struggling to stay upright. I initially assumed that it was just an injured person, but the longer it went on, the less that made any sense. I could hear footsteps on the gravel. They were definitely bipedal, and the speed at which they moved around the yard just didn't match any injured adult that I would have thought of. The pace was too quick and too consistent. Something about the rhythm was off. I didn't want to look out the blinds because the noise felt directed, as if the source was trying to get close to the house, but after several minutes the footsteps moved away quickly, much faster than I had expected from someone running in the dark. The sound carried until it disappeared into the bush. When everything went quiet, I grabbed my phone and tried to record, but the only thing audible on the playback is distant static. I went downstairs to ask the others if they had heard anything, but they hadn't, or at least they said that they hadn't. Their room was shut up with the TV on, so they easily could have missed it for sure. I told them what happened, but their reaction felt more polite than genuinely concerned. I didn't push it any further after that. Now, for months after that, I avoided the bush tracks whenever possible. It's hard to avoid them entirely because all entry roads pass through the wooded sections here, but I changed my routines and I'd wait until sunrise to walk the dog too. When riding my bike home after work, I'd keep the lights off until I reached the open paddocks as well. Nothing else happened for a while, but the next strange incident involved my dog. She started waiting near the hallway entrance at night, staring toward the darker side of the house. If I called her, she wouldn't turn her head, and it just wasn't like her. She's normally responsive and food motivated, and I thought maybe that she had heard possums or something small moving in the ceiling space. A few nights later, she sat in front of the main door. I assumed that she needed to go outside, so I opened it, and she sprinted off immediately into the back paddock, straight toward the tree line. I followed her with a torch, worried that she would chase something and get injured. When I got about 50 meters behind the house, I heard movement in the bush. Then that same scream erupted again. Same length, same roughness, and same unnatural volume. Whatever birds or animals were asleep in the trees that night, they took off the moment that it started. My dog burst out of the bush seconds later, running toward me as fast as she could. I didn't wait to see anything else as well. We headed back to the house. The screaming continued for several more seconds, then cut off, and I slammed the door behind us and stayed awake until sunrise. Months passed without any more activity, but then about a week ago I started hearing tapping on the walls at night. Always brief and always in the same general area near the living room. But last night, it escalated. There was a series of taps against my bedroom window, upstairs, at least 4 meters off the ground. I didn't open the blinds, I just waited for it to stop. I also didn't call the police because I don't have any evidence of an actual break-in attempt, and the noise stopped before I could even get recording anyway. But I also don't have an explanation that makes any sense yet. I asked my grandfather if he remembered anything odd about the land, and he told me that over the last few decades, several people have been found dead in different parts of the bush bordering the property apparently. Falls, exposure, theories of misadventure. None of the official reports mention animals or crime. In fact, nothing really ties them together, except the general location, that is. I still don't know what to make of any of this, and I'm trying to stay rational, but I also don't feel comfortable walking outside after dark anymore. If anything else happens, then I'll document it and try to get clearer audio. At the moment, all I can say is that the pattern hasn't stopped, and I have no idea what the next step should be. I didn't think much about my unusual experiences when I was young. mostly because no one in my family talked openly about them. The first time that I heard anything strange was maybe around the age of 12, after my older cousin Daniel mentioned incidences that he'd experienced years earlier. He said it casually, like he was trying not to give the topic too much weight. But the way that he said it, it always stayed with me. Back when he was in secondary school, there had been a fire in a housing block near his building. He actually helped pull a toddler out of the smoke, but the child's mother didn't survive, unfortunately. According to him, that event, it never really ended too. He said that he kept noticing a woman who resembled the one who died. Always briefly, always in ways that he tried to rationalize. I really only ever heard about this because I overheard him explaining it to a friend when he thought that nobody was listening. Not long after that, though, I started having these reoccurring dreams. A woman would appear in them, someone with a wide, blunt face wearing a dark plain dress that ended at her knees. Her expression, it never changed. Her eyes looked strained and her mouth was open in a really odd way, and she always faced me directly. I never woke up screaming or anything. I mean, she was unsettling, but I didn't interpret it as threatening or anything. Up through college, I just sort of dismissed it. I assumed my mind had assembled a face from random features that I had seen somewhere or something. I never brought it up with anyone too. I tend to assume ordinary explanations, memory errors, stress, imagination. And none of this interfered with my life as well until my third year of university, when I was staying alone in a rented room. That's when the mental images started happening even when I was awake. I would think that I saw her standing near the wall or sitting beside the door or the bed sometimes. Mind you, I didn't hear anything and nothing ever moved, but the sense of her being there just kept showing up. I got stuck in a loop where I interpreted the constant mental picture of having some kind of meaning as well, like it was directed at me. That period affected me more than I wanted to admit as well. I started avoiding darkness. I kept the bathroom light on while washing my face because I hated closing my eyes. I had repetitive nightmares, sometimes identical to the previous ones. It became just exhausting. A family member suggested a basic cleansing ritual from some sort of home tradition, and although I never really believed in any of that stuff, the routine itself, it definitely calmed me down a bit. Over time as well, those images faded. 3 years later, I moved for work and professional exams, and life there was pretty quiet. I watched horror content, stayed alone in my flat when my roommates traveled, walked back from restaurants at night. But nothing unusual happened for a long time. So, when those dreams returned about 2 months ago, I initially brushed them off. I repeated the same ritual again, more out of habit than belief, but this time nothing changed. Still though, I wasn't anxious yet. I assumed that it would stop eventually. Everything shifted though in October, on the 24th. I was asleep in my room at the hostel when I woke up abruptly because something felt like it dropped its weight across my torso. It wasn't full body pressure, but more like someone leaning down on me with both arms. I couldn't move for a few seconds, and it felt like whoever or whatever it was had a single thin layer of fabric between us. The feeling was so distinct and physical, but not at the same time. By the time that I could move again, the room was quiet and nothing looked different. After that, I refused to sleep alone for several days, and I wasn't having panic attacks or anything, but I felt physically tense all the time. My thoughts kept jumping back to that moment, and my brain filled in the gaps with the same image from before. When I finally told my family, something came up that I had forgotten about. Years ago, maybe when I was probably about 8 or 9, My mother had taken me and my younger brother to sleep in one room so Daniel could revise for exams without noise. I remember being awake, talking quietly with her when Daniel suddenly yelled from the other room. He ran out into the open area between the rooms and the main gate, and before I could make sense of what I saw, my mother covered our faces with her hands. All I caught was a fast, low movement by the gate, almost like someone pulling themselves upward or away but on their elbows. That memory had always been pretty vague, but when I described the woman from my dreams to my family, both my mother and cousin reacted in a way that made me immediately uncomfortable. They said that my description matched the figure that Daniel had talked about years earlier, and it also resembled whatever had been seen crouched near the gate that night. Hearing them say that, it made the whole situation feel heavier than I wanted it to be. I'm planning on going back home soon, and my parents want me to speak with one of the local counselors who works with both psychological and cultural cases. I don't know what I think about that or any of this really, but the stress is starting to interfere with my sleep again, so I don't know, but maybe I should do it. At this point, I just want the situation to lose its hold on me so that I can go back to focusing on my work and my routine. So, to begin, I would just like to say that at first I didn't notice anything unusual. I was 17 and living with my older sister while our parents were out for the evening one day. My daily routine, it involved me spending time in my bedroom studying or browsing online. That night, I suddenly remembered a question that I wanted to ask her about something minor. It was an assignment or a school-related task or something like that, but the specifics didn't really matter. I left my desk and walked to her room. Now, our house had a short hallway shaped like a T, with my room and Maya's room at the opposite ends. As I opened my door, I immediately saw her moving into her room. She was carrying a small plate, wearing casual clothes that she usually wore at home, and she shut the door behind her. I paused, thinking that I could catch her before she settled in for the night. I called her name once, assuming that she might be listening to music, and when she didn't respond, I knocked lightly, then harder, and then I called her again, but still with no reply. Assuming that she hadn't heard me or something, I started tapping on the door rhythmically to get her attention. That's when I heard a voice. It was Maya, but not from inside of her room. The voice came from behind me down the hallway. I froze, and slowly I turned to see her standing at the end of the corridor, watching me. My stomach, it dropped immediately. I realized that the person that I had watched walk into her room and close the door was not her. Everything about that moment was unnerving because, I had directly seen the figure carrying an object and perform an action that I thought only Maya could do. Nothing in its appearance suggested that it was wrong. It wore her clothes, moved like her, and carried the plate exactly as she would. I remember feeling a mix of disbelief and fear, and also worry that maybe an intruder had somehow got in. The recognition of her likeness, though, combined with the impossibility of the situation, just made no sense to me. Maya, though, she reacted calmly. She walked over to the kitchen, grabbed a chair, and returned to the hallway, telling me firmly to check the room again. When we looked inside, there was nothing. The bed was made, the plate was untouched. It was as if the figure had just never even existed. The tension lingered for several minutes afterward, though, leaving me truly unsettled. We tried to rationalize it together. Could it have just been a reflection from the hallway mirror, a trick of the light, a momentary lapse in my perception? Nothing fully explained the experience, though. I have had other odd experiences too. Brief shadows or sounds, but those could usually be explained. This one, it felt different because, I was sure that I had seen the figure interact physically with the environment, closing a door, and yet it disappeared completely without a trace. I later researched similar cases, and I found discussions of doppelganger-like experiences. Reading them didn't really clarify anything, unfortunately, but it helped me to frame what had happened as a documented type of phenomenon, rather than just complete hallucination. Even so, the feeling of seeing someone mimic a person that I know so precisely has stayed with me. I remain cautious around moments that feel too familiar or oddly timed in that part of the house. Over the next few weeks, too, I avoided being alone in that hallway after dark. It didn't recur immediately, but I remained aware that my perception could be challenged again at any moment. The incident, as you can probably tell, left a lasting impression on me. One of the few experiences that I could not easily explain or just dismiss. But in the end, I treated it as a puzzling anomaly rather than something supernatural. It changed the way that I approached the house, my routine, my sense of certainty about what I could observe, everything in the end. And quite honestly, I have never been the same since then. When I was 16, my family moved from southern England to a county in Ireland. The area was rural with scattered farms, narrow country roads, and a network of small rivers as well. At first, I found the location pretty isolating. There was little to do for a teenager beyond school and chores, really. The climate only added to the sense of monotony. Constant rain made outdoor activities difficult and left most of the fields muddy and empty. One November afternoon, heavy rainfall caused local waterways to overflow. After school, I set out toward home and quickly encountered a crowd gathered along the main road. Residents were stalled by the flooding and they were waiting for tractors or other vehicles to ferry them across submerged areas. Impatient, I decided to look for an alternate route rather than wait. I turned toward a side road that I knew eventually led to my home. After walking for a few minutes, I arrived at a small stone arch bridge. The bridge was blocked by traffic cones and a garda stood in front of it, likely preventing anyone from crossing due to unsafe conditions. I considered returning, but a nearby vehicle, a farmer's jeep, pulled up at the intersection. The garda walked over to speak with the driver, providing an opportunity to cross the bridge unnoticed. I took the chance too, moving quickly while observing the officer, and reached the far side of the bridge. Immediately, I realized why the bridge had been closed though. The road ahead was completely submerged, with water brown and opaque, extending across the fields like an impromptu river. I calculated that distance to my house was manageable and chose to continue, lifting my school bag above my head to prevent it from getting soaked. The water, it rose quickly though, reaching waist level within a couple of minutes. It was cold and the current was uneven due to the terrain beneath the water, which was mostly mud and debris now. Progress was slow and physically taxing, and at one point, I considered turning back, but I recognized a tall oak tree in the distance that I had passed frequently on dog walks. Using it as a reference, I continued through the flood. Now, at one point, I actually got stuck all of a sudden, and I wasn't sure why at first. I began to sort of slowly submerge into the water as well. At first, I tried to get out thinking that maybe I was in a low spot or something. But then, I swear to you that I felt something grab my foot, or my ankle at least. I began to get pulled down below the water by something. I had no idea what it was because the water was so murky, so I couldn't see underneath there, but I was sure that something had a hold of my foot and was pulling me under. I began to panic and I was thrashing around everywhere. Eventually, I found some purchase with my other foot and I managed to sort of pull or yank my foot out of the grasp of whatever this was that was grabbing me. Mind you, I was nearly up to my chin at this point. which made very little sense to me because, I was up to my torso before this and it was like this the whole way, so I have no idea what could have done that. In any case, I quickly got out of there and it took nearly the entire afternoon to reach dry ground near my house. By the time that I emerged, daylight was fading and the water levels had begun to recede slightly. I was exhausted, soaked and cold and scared, to be quite honest, but thankfully physically unharmed. Reflecting on it afterward, the incident highlighted the challenges of navigating rural infrastructure during extreme weather. My decision to continue through the flood, it definitely carried real risk. But careful observation, knowledge of landmarks, and measured risk assessment, it allowed me to eventually reach safety. Still though, I went back to roughly where that location was later, and I never did find an explanation for what the heck grabbed my ankle that day. The experience, though, it remained a reference point for me in the years later, reinforcing the importance of environmental awareness and preparedness when moving through unfamiliar rural areas during heavy rainfall or even flooding. And these days, I take it far more seriously. At the time that this happened, I was 20 years old and enrolled at a university in a coastal city. It was small enough for people to recognize each other quickly, but large enough to hide things from most people. Daily life revolved around lectures, cheap bars, and routine drug use at the time. None of it felt remarkable, but nothing violent had ever happened to me directly, which is probably why I misjudged the situation when it really mattered the most. So, one evening, a friend of mine, Elliot, invited me to attend a formal event connected to one of his student societies. It was held at a cocktail bar near the waterfront. Alcohol was plentiful and the mood was relaxed. At some point during the night, though, we noticed a man that we both recognized from earlier years. He used to supply us with some weed when we were younger, but we hadn't seen him since before university. His name was Marco. Marco joined us without hesitation. The conversation was ordinary at first, but when we asked how he'd been doing, he mentioned, without lowering his voice, that someone that he knew had been seriously injured earlier that evening. He didn't explain any further, but the way that he said it suggested that this was an inconvenience rather than alarming. Neither Elliot nor I pressed him on it, though. Later, when the bar began to close, Marco offered to let us smoke at his apartment. He invited the two of us over with some other people as well, a couple that neither of us had met. I felt uneasy about it, but I didn't say anything in the end. Really, there was no obvious reason to refuse, and declining would have felt really awkward. On the walk there, as we passed a convenience store near a residential corner, at the edge of the pavement, there was a dark, irregular pool spreading toward the road. Marco pointed at it casually and said that it belonged to the person that he'd mentioned earlier. It took a moment for me to register that what I was looking at was blood. There was enough of it, too, that no reasonable explanation involved a minor injury. From that point forward, everything felt suddenly misaligned, too. The direction that we were walking matched the direction the blood trail continued in. It appeared repeatedly along the street, thinning and then collecting again. Nobody else was outside. There were no emergency vehicles, and the absence of response was as unsettling as the blood itself. When we reached Marco's building, another pooled stain sat directly outside of the entrance. He unlocked the door and explained that the incident had happened there, following an argument involving multiple people apparently. He described it, though, as if recounting a logistical problem rather than an act of violence. He locked the door behind us once we were inside. The apartment was cluttered. The living room contained stacks of takeaway containers arranged deliberately rather than discarded. When I looked closer, they were not empty as well. Each one contained a quantity of synthetic drugs, organized and portioned. Now, I had seen drugs before, but never in that sort of volume or setting. The couple with us became visibly tense upon seeing them. One of them lifted a phone to take a picture, and Marco reacted immediately, striking the phone from his hand and issuing a direct warning. The room, it went quiet after that. Despite everything, we were encouraged to smoke. Marco suggested that we do it in the bathroom, seated on the floor. I complied, reasoning that leaving abruptly might escalate the situation. The drugs had little effect on calming me, though, and I was focused on exit points, sounds outside of the door, and the possibility that we were witnessing the aftermath of something still unresolved. Partway through the night, another person entered the apartment. He appeared young, possibly under 18, and was visibly intoxicated. His behavior, though, was erratic. He moved between people, spoke rapidly, and performed actions that suggested stimulant use. Nobody corrected him, and Marco appeared entertained by it. I could not determine whether this individual had been involved in the earlier violence, but the uncertainty itself was destabilizing. Eventually, Elliot said that we needed to leave, and I supported the decision immediately. Marco didn't resist. He unlocked the door and let us out without comment, and we all walked home pretty quickly, retracing the same street. The blood, it was still visible, darkening as it dried. No one followed us, no sirens sounded, and by the time that we reached our building, my hands were visibly shaking. In the days that followed, I avoided Marco entirely. I didn't ask questions or look for explanations. What stayed with me, though, wasn't fear of a specific person, but the recognition of just how easily I'd accepted a situation that clearly involved serious violence. Nothing else occurred, thankfully, but the experience permanently altered how I assess risk and proximately the people that I barely know. I don't frame the event as a story anymore as well. Instead, I treat it as a lesson in poor judgment and delayed instinct. Whatever happened before we arrived at that apartment, it didn't involve us, thankfully, but it came close enough that night to leave a lasting impression. The situation began gradually, over the course of several months, and only made sense in hindsight. At the time, I was living with my family in a small residential village in the Netherlands. The street was short, with detached houses and little traffic. Most residents had lived there for years, and informal familiarity was pretty normal. A property 2 doors down changed occupants when a middle-aged couple moved out and an older pair took their place. Their names were Martin and Elise. Martin was a retired civil servant who kept to himself for the most part. Elise, on the other hand, was immediately social. She brought produce from her garden, offered to help neighbors with errands, and took particular interest in children. My parents, they initially interpreted this as generosity. She even spent time showing my younger sibling basic sewing and even some crafts. Over time, Elise's behavior became inconsistent, though. She shared information that was either inappropriate or just sort of disconnected from context. Some statements also contradicted things that she had said earlier. My parents noticed it, but assumed it was just pretty harmless for the most part. Well, several months later, Martin was removed from the house following a police intervention related to domestic conflict. Details were unclear, but he was temporarily barred from returning, allegedly. Elise began appearing at our home frequently now, expressing fear that he might come back unexpectedly. My father reassured her that the situation was being monitored and declined her request to stay overnight. Shortly afterward, Martin returned briefly to collect belongings. During that visit, he shouted about a missing firearm. It then emerged that Elise had previously given it to my teenage brother because she thought that it suited his interests. This was documented later, and certainly raised concerns, given his age. The dynamic changed sharply after a minor dispute. Elise, asked my mother to borrow a specific trailer that we owned. When my mother refused, because the vehicle was in use, Elise became fixated on the refusal. From that point forward, her behavior shifted too, from intrusive to just downright hostile. She began placing objects in our mailbox meant to cause minor injury. She disposed of household waste on the edge of our property. She displayed handwritten messages on boards outside of her house, accusing my family of various offenses. These claims, they were also reported to the local authorities. None were ever substantiated, but they definitely accumulated. She contacted police repeatedly, framing herself as a vulnerable resident under threat. One allegation involved my older brother being dangerous based solely on his clothing choices. She also followed children on their way home from school, including my sibling and a classmate. She spent hours seated outside, watching the street and speaking to passerby. My parents, they later learned that at least one other family had experienced similar treatments years earlier that had chosen not to escalate it. And the situation, it worsened too, because Elise appeared to want a visible reaction, but she wasn't getting one. When my mother responded verbally to the accusations, Elise escalated further. And on one occasion, she attempted to provoke physical contact by grabbing at my mother's hands. There were no visible injuries, which left my parents without evidence. Police responses became dismissive due to the volume of prior complaints that Elise had filed against us. At the time, I was 11, and genuinely I just tried to stay out of it. But one morning in late autumn, after several days of rain, I was sent to walk along our street to meet my sibling and another child returning from school. The roadside bordered open farmland and the ground was saturated. While walking, I noticed a light-colored car approaching at speed. At first, I assumed it belonged to a neighbor, but as the vehicle closed the distance, it became clear that the driver was Elise, and she was not slowing down. She was looking directly ahead, smiling with loud music playing. The car continued toward me without deviation, and when it was only a few meters away, I stepped off the road onto the adjacent field to avoid being struck. The car veered partially off the road, cutting into the mud, before stopping near her house. She remained inside, gesturing dismissively, and at the time I didn't really fully understand the severity of what had just happened. That evening, my parents brought me to the local police station. I was questioned alone. The officers asked repeatedly whether I had misunderstood or been influenced by my parents. The discussion appeared close to ending without action until one officer noticed my shoes and trousers were covered in wet soil. The officers returned with us to the street. Tire tracks were visible in the field where I had stepped aside, and the path, it matched the angle of Elise's vehicle. She was taken in for questioning after that, later that day, and it was determined that she had intended to frighten me. Further evaluation followed. Adult children provided records and testimony indicating long-standing behavioral issues and a pattern of targeting individuals within her environment. And she was subsequently placed under psychiatric supervision. After that, the activity thankfully stopped, and my family, they moved later that year. There was no dramatic conclusion to this, no apology, no explanation that resolved everything. The outcome, it was all dependent upon chance, physical evidence, and timing really, rather than foresight. And I guess that's what really bothers me the most. You see, if it had not rained that day, and if the soil wasn't as wet as it was, would she have gained more traction with her tires? And if she had, would I even be here? I'm going to try and recount this the way that I understand it now, with distance and hindsight, not the way that I rationalized it at the time. So, in early 2013, I was finishing secondary school and transitioning into adulthood with very little practical understanding of personal safety. I had just turned 18 and took a casual job at a small organic grocery shop in a central business district. It was my first job dealing directly with the public. The store was independently owned and financially unstable, and run by a single proprietor who valued flexibility and ideology over formal workplace safeguards. The shop itself was small, with a single employee on shift. By the time that I was assigned afternoon to close hours, I was routinely alone for 6 to 8 hours at a stretch. The cash counter was positioned near the front window, facing inward, which meant that anyone standing on the footpath could observe me without me seeing them, unless I turned around, that is. This became relevant very quickly too. You see, the store was located beside transitional housing, used by people recently released from custody or living under social assistance. Local businesses, they were already accustomed to safety issues in the evenings. Staff at nearby cafes routinely walked female employees to their cars. I did not receive that consideration myself, but my parking space was directly behind the shop, close enough that I convinced myself that it was safe, even though I closed the store alone pretty much every night. During the first few weeks, I noticed people lingering outside of the window while I worked the register. Some stared openly, others pretended to look at notices posted on the glass. I felt uncomfortable, but assumed that this was pretty normal for this downtown retail area. I didn't raise the issue with anyone, and one Saturday morning during the summer market season, I covered an early shift for someone. Customer traffic was steady, and the environment felt less tense. Near midday, a man in his early 20s entered with a flyer for a meditation workshop hosted by a local alternative wellness group or something like that. His name was Evan, and he asked if we displayed community notices. I agreed and spoke with him briefly. He appeared intoxicated, probably weed, but was calm and articulate. The interaction lasted no more than a few minutes and seemed unremarkable at the time. 2 days later, Evan returned during an afternoon shift. The shop was quiet that day. He positioned himself near the counter and attempted to initiate ongoing conversation. When I moved to restock shelves, he followed me. When I went to check the back room, he waited near the doorway. He began commenting on my appearance in ways that were personal and, well, inappropriate in ways, though not explicitly sexual at first. He framed his comments in spiritual language, claiming that he felt a connection and that my friendliness had triggered a personal revelation for him or something like that. At 18, I didn't understand that politeness does not equal consent, and I attempted to redirect the conversation, thanked him for the compliments, and told him that I needed to work. He didn't leave. Instead, he remained in the store for hours. When I informed him that loitering was not allowed, he began purchasing the cheapest item in the shop every hour, using government assistance, asserting that this made him a legitimate customer. I contacted the store owner from the back room and explained that I felt unsafe now. Her response was dismissive. She stated that the business was struggling and that anyone spending money should not be discouraged. She framed his presence as harmless and implied that my discomfort was a personal perception issue rather than a workplace concern. After that conversation, I stopped expecting support from my employer. Over the next several weeks, Evan's behavior escalated in measurable ways too. He began bringing handwritten notes describing romantic fixation and destiny. He left flowers on the counter daily. He started referring to me by my nickname drawn from a popular film released that year, insisting that we were reenacting a narrative meant to culminate in a relationship. He played music from the film on his phone while watching me work. The fixation, it was no longer subtle. When other customers entered, he reacted with visible agitation too. He positioned himself between me and male patrons in particular. He told me that he was watching out for threats, and referred to himself as my protector. I didn't challenge his language, which in retrospect was probably a big mistake. For a brief period though, he suddenly stopped coming to the store. I later learned, though, that he had apparently been admitted to hospital. When he returned, the behavior resumed immediately. At some point, Evan obtained my phone number by contacting a co-worker from a different shift and claiming that he had lost my contact details too. He then conducted an online search and located my residential address. We lived on opposite sides of the city. There was no public transport connecting the areas at night. I never saw him at my home, thankfully, but he referenced details that suggested that he had been nearby. I didn't block his number. My reasoning at the time was fear-based rather than logical, and I believed that ignoring him entirely would probably provoke the escalation even more. When I enrolled in my first term at the local polytechnic, the situation worsened again. Evan introduced a small group of associates and attempted to normalize his behavior through them. They told me that he was imaginative, emotionally expressive, and just misunderstood. They dismissed my concerns as overreactions. Soon after, he informed me that his friends would stand outside the shop during my shifts to ensure my safety. And they did exactly that. 2 positioned themselves near the front entrance, another near the rear exit. They entered the shop intermittently, each purchasing minimal items to justify remaining inside, which meant that I was routinely alone with 5 or 6 men in a confined space with exits obstructed now. I began locking the shop early, turning off the lights and completing closing procedures in darkness to avoid being seen. I stayed inside for extended periods to ensure that they dispersed, and one night when I finally exited, they were waiting beside my car. Evan attempted to touch me while the others encouraged him. I activated my car alarm, which startled them long enough for me to get inside and leave. And after that, I quit the job immediately, without notice. The harassment continued remotely. Evan cycled through phone numbers. He referenced passing my street late at night and framed it as protection. After several months, all communication stopped, and I later learned that this was due to incarceration for a parole violation or something like that. Approximately 6 months later, he contacted me again from another number. He informed me of his release date and described explicit sexual fantasies involving me. He framed them as inevitable, and I ended the call, destroyed the phone in the end, changed my number, deleted all of my online profiles, and relocated within weeks. That decision definitely disrupted my education, finances, and even my support network. But unfortunately, it was not optional any longer. During the pandemic and lockdowns, I developed a bit of a habit of driving out to the country, aka the Ozarks in Missouri, in the wee hours of the morning. Honestly, it was great too. It felt like I had the entire country to myself at times, with not another living human around. Even driving from Springfield to Joplin on the interstate was pretty isolated, except for 18-wheelers, I guess. Now, I had a few paranormal encounters during this time, and this is one of them. So on one of these nights during the pandemic, me and my wife at the time were out driving around in the early morning near Springfield, Missouri. We were cruising the rural backroads and farm roads. We were getting tired and decided to take a quicker way home, so I ended up turning down this one dark road that I knew of. I smoke cigarettes, so I keep my window cracked. And all of a sudden I get this whiff of, and the best way to describe it is like rotting onions. We both started getting bad vibes, like we just shouldn't be here. I'm now looking for a side road or a driveway to turn around in, and no sooner than I get the feeling that we need to find a place to turn around is when we see a man limp running. The craziest thing is that he had on a dress suit and his head was pale white and no hair. Another thing that made it weird is that he never turned around or otherwise acknowledged that I was even there. He didn't move over, flinch, or anything. I had this gut feeling not to pass him. We ended up coming to another road and I took it. and this thing was probably 100 feet or 30 meters ahead of us. This happened around 4 in the morning. The road was dark and it was void of any street or traffic lights, except for my vehicles. He had no light on him that I could tell of. The only things on that road were a couple of houses and a cemetery about maybe a mile further than we were. Later that afternoon, I drove to that cemetery and there was a pickup truck with a man and a woman mowing the cemetery, giving me the evil eye. I never stopped, but I wanted to see if any ground had been disturbed. I know, there's no such thing as zombies, right? I'm not talking a parasitic or fungi type. It is impossible biologically for a decaying corpse to move on its own, from what I understand, but I just wanted to rule it out, I guess. I really don't know where the smell was coming from, but the odor was gone when I went back, and any other time that I've smelled something similar to that in a mausoleum. Anyway, I have no idea what was going on, but it was creepy nonetheless. So I'm generally pretty skeptical about cryptids and the like, but I've recently had some experiences that I cannot seem to explain. I've been an avid outdoorsman my entire life, and I've spent countless hours in and around the woods, and this one just has me stumped. So, this all took place in the mountains of western Montana over a 2-week time span. I was out having a campfire in a relatively secluded location with one of my friends when we noticed a random light from off in the woods. I didn't think too much of it at the time, but we noticed it moving around a bit, so we just sort of chalked it up to a late-night hiker with a headlamp. But considering our location and the time of night, it just didn't feel comfortable staying around, so we left. A couple of days later, I returned to the same spot alone, and I didn't see any lights at first, but after about an hour they showed up again, in roughly the same direction, but this time there were 3 lights. The weird thing though was that they all moved in sync, bobbing up and down and getting closer and further away, all in unison. I decided to walk towards them to see if it might have just been a sign reflecting a light that I hadn't noticed or something, but as I approached, they seemed to be getting further away, maintaining roughly 300 yards of distance between me and them. So in the end, I just turned around and left the area. Then, a few days after that, I returned to the same place, this time at around 2:30 in the morning, but I just couldn't shake the feeling of paranoia that had overcome me this night, seemingly from the minute that I showed up there. At about 3:45, I heard a single noise too that sounded like a whistle, but just a single note, and nothing crazy, but it sounded far off and deep into the woods. So I dismissed it as just a bird or some other small critter, but about 20 minutes later I heard more whistling, this time a genuine tune that lasted about 15 seconds and sounded no more than 50 yards away. At that point, I said to heck with this, and I bolted to my car and I left. I haven't been back since, and maybe I'm just being paranoid, as there has been a camper murdered in that area not too long beforehand, but this has been my creepiest experience in the woods since, well, as long as I can really remember. But what do you guys think? Is there anything in the area that could explain these encounters? And if there is, what is it? Also, for reference, here's the picture of the lights that I saw on that second day. We moved around a lot when I was a kid. The first time there was any sort of ghost or Hatman figure mentioned around me, I was only a few months old. We were in a women and children's refuge, and my older brother and I shared a room while my mum had her own. And one night, my brother goes into my mum's room and wakes her up, crying and yelling, bad man," thinking that it was my dad, which is unlikely as he didn't actually want me. My mum goes into the room and she sees the window open and me on the floor beside it. I was too young to be able to leave my cot, and my brother couldn't have been able to reach me at this age either. It's important to note that We were in a refuge because my dad was abusive to my mother, not because he had any interest in trying to take us away from her. But later on, we moved twice more. The second time, we stay in this house for like 5+ years, and after a few years, I begin to feel this presence watching me. It's usually in the hallway leading to the kitchen or in the kitchen directly. I'll be washing dishes and I'll hear footsteps behind me, but when I turn around, there's no one ever there. And listen, we have wooden floorboards, so it's very easy to tell where the footsteps are behind you based on the creaking and all that. They sound like someone had just walked into the kitchen, but then there's just nobody ever there. I felt breathing down my neck at this stage. There's always especially been this sense of like watching, and for a reason that I cannot explain, I feel as though it's not malevolent. I've never felt very afraid by it, I guess, but it feels like this entity is just watching to make sure the house is running well and things are getting done. I've never seen a ghost or anything with my own eyes, but when I think of this ghost, a certain image always comes to mind. I can't imagine him any other way. I mean, he's tall and mostly made of shadow, but he also wears a hat like a fedora. Now one day, I was talking to my mum about it, wondering if she'd seen or felt anything, and she said yeah, actually. She'd been having dreams sometime about a man who was tall, and I said, wearing a hat? And she goes, yeah, like a fedora? That was freaky. Now recently, I saw online about people seeing the Hat Man during sleep paralysis and stuff. I've never had that, and also I don't have like schizophrenia or anything either. I know some people might chalk it up all to like trauma or whatever, but I know my trauma responses by now, and my mum knowing exactly what this ghost thing looked like was weird. I mean, the fact that it matched up perfectly with the image that I had in my own head. I've seen a few psychs over the years, and I've had no experiences with hallucinations or anything, and I have a good card of health, so I really just don't know what to think about it. Since the time that I was a child, there has been things that have happened in or to my family over the years that fit snugly into the topic of the paranormal. I no longer live in my childhood home, having moved 5 years ago to a farmhouse more northern up in the state. But an occurrence that I do recall was a girl that could sometimes be spotted just across the street near our mailbox. So, our house was just off of a corner, and across the street lay a neighbor's dark red house with 2 pine trees close to the road, and in front of that, on the edge of the road, was our mailbox. Now, as you turn onto our road coming in from the direction of town at night, the headlights of the car would, for a moment, illuminate the mailbox and the pine trees as you pass. And it was only in the headlights that you could ever see her, though, a young woman. Maybe looked to be in her late teens or early 20s, with dark straight brown hair, clothes being reminiscent of what girls wore in the 70s as far as the skirt and blouse went. She would be leaning toward the road, looking towards the corner the car was pulling onto the road from, and pushing a part of her hair behind her ear, arms wrapped tightly around her as if she was cold. It was like she was waiting for someone to pick her up, though she always looked through the car as if it wasn't there, never acknowledging it. Whenever she was spotted as well, she would always do the exact same thing, like a video recording, and only ever at night. Once the car's headlights passed her, she would always be gone, though. Now, I never saw the girl myself, only my mother and uncle had ever seen her. I'd like to believe that their tales of seeing her were just a tell of a funny, spooky ghost story, but neither of them were very good actors, and my mum has always had car anxiety since getting into a crash in her teens, so it was always out of character for her to suddenly demand the car be stopped on a dime in the dark like that, and have my dad slam on the brakes, all because she saw the girl again. As for my uncle, well, he'd have no reason to come home from work late at night. He lived with us on and off throughout my childhood, and occasionally, but swiftly backing the car into the front yard, almost hitting the bushes just to shine the headlight into the neighbor's yard facing the pine tree, was really out of character. And I would say that this would be an excellent stunt for him to add legitimacy to the ghost story, if not for the fact that it was often well after midnight, and would have really no reason to believe that any of us kids were still awake to see the action. Still, as far as encounters my family has had, the idea of my mum and her brother occasionally seeing a girl who isn't there is rather mundane, I'll admit. But what gave me chills, though, was this. You see, 2 years ago, an unclaimed, heavily decomposed body was found back in my old hometown and reported. My mother caught wind of it and decided to tell my dad. Back when he was young, one of his uncles just vanished without a trace, and when bodies in the area pop up, he likes to call in to find out if it could possibly be his missing uncle. This body, though, was another dead end there, but triggered my mother to go looking into cold cases around the area, just out of curiosity. In real time, while she was scrolling, I saw her almost drop her phone and gasp as well, calling my dad to come quick. I had a thought for a moment that maybe she'd found my dad's uncle, or perhaps something worse, but worth the gasp. "That's her." She shoved her screen into my dad's face. "That's her. That's the girl who stands by our mailbox in the headlights." Looking at her phone was a black and white photo that perfectly matched the girl both my mother and uncle had described for the last almost 30 years now, down to the letter even. She was 19, lived a town over, and was last seen in my hometown in December of 1976. Her body was found 2 days later, having presumably died from multiple stab wounds found on her body. If this was a prank that my mother was pulling, having known about this earlier and only showing it now, 30 years is quite the long game to wait to pull that trigger. And once again, she is a terrible actor. I feel uncomfortable sharing the name of the girl, as she still has living siblings according to Find a Grave, but strange things do indeed happen in this world. About 3 months ago, on my usual daily walk, I was walking that day in the evening. I was at a road in my village where new houses were being built, and as I was walking, in front of me, a dark, solid black arm from below the elbow, including the palm and fingers, was running from my right to the left. Then it went under a metal sheet, and it made a noise, so I knew that I wasn't imagining things, and disappears. Well, jump to a month ago, I was in bed, scrolling on Reddit before going to sleep. After a while, out of nowhere, I feel and see my blanket moving and rise by my left leg. Then a hand grabs my left leg, firmly holding it tight. I shook my leg strongly, instinctively, and as I moved my leg, I felt it kick a hand, I would guess. Now, I know that this is going to sound a bit insane, but I shook it off and continued scrolling. The reason for this reaction was because, well, I'm pretty much used to the paranormal stuff happening to me now. For example, not related to this story, but I was at a friend's house and we were outside chilling and talking at like 3:30 in the morning. I was on a couch facing the kitchen, and I saw a shadow figure, black but transparent, like it was black but you could see through it. I tell my friend to look and to see if he sees what I'm seeing, and he goes completely white. Mind you, he's a complete skeptic. At that moment was absolute confirmation for me that I'm sensitive to these things and not just seeing stuff. That wasn't my first rodeo, obviously, but that was the first time that somebody else saw what I clearly saw too. Honestly, I don't even know where to start with this. So I moved out of my parents' house 2 weeks ago, thinking that I'd finally have some freedom and space of my own. At first it was exciting, decorating, staying up late, no rules, but now I wish I'd never left. I just don't feel safe here. I don't feel alone. It started small. I'd put my keys on the counter, only to find them on the floor or in the fridge. I thought that I was just being forgetful, but then it got worse. One night I came home and all the cabinets in my kitchen were open, like every single one of them. I know that I didn't leave them like that, and then a few nights ago I woke up and noticed my closet door was open. I never leave that one open either. I swear that I shut it before bed as well, and as I stared at the dark space inside, I heard it. A soft, raspy breathing, so faint that it could have been my imagination, but I'm pretty sure that it wasn't. I pulled the covers over my head and stayed like that until morning. The next night I woke up to a noise under my bed. At first it was just a sort of low creaking, like the wood shifting, but then it escalated. A quiet scream, choked, gurgling, and desperate. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to make me freeze, and I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe. When I finally got the courage to grab my phone and turn on the flashlight, there was nothing under there, but the shadows are the worst. At night, I'll wake up and see somebody in the doorway, just standing there, not moving, not blinking, and the first time I thought that it was just a trick of the light, but it's happened every night since then. Sometimes they're closer, like they're stepping into my room, and I cannot tell if they're real or if I'm just going insane, but last night I locked my door before bed, and when I woke up, the lock was completely broken. The door was wide open, and there were faint wet footprints leading into my room and stopping right next to my bed. This morning, I found something on my bathroom sink, a hairbrush, old, cracked, with hair still tangled in it, and it was definitely not mine. I don't even own a hairbrush like that, but when I touched it, it felt damp, like it had been pulled from somewhere wet. In any case, I threw it out, but an hour later it was back on the sink again. I've started hearing whispers when I'm home alone as well. I can't make out what they're saying, but it's like they're coming from the walls, just low enough to drive me crazy, and I can't eat, I can't sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I feel like somebody's watching me, and I just don't know what to do. I cannot stay here, but where can I go? My parents won't believe me. They'll say that I'm imagining it or being dramatic, but I know what's happening here. There's something here with me, and something that doesn't want me to leave, something that wants me to stay, and every night it feels like it's just getting closer. And look, I don't even know why I'm sharing this, but maybe it's to make sense of things, or maybe it's just because I need someone or anyone to know what's happening to me. But since this morning, everything has spiraled out of control. I thought that staying out of the apartment would help, but no matter where I go, it feels like it follows me now. I woke up early at a friend's house, hoping for some peace. I didn't tell them what was going on. I didn't want to sound insane, but when I opened my eyes, their cat was sitting in the doorway of the guest room staring at me. Its fur was matted and wet, even though my friend swore that it hadn't been outside. And then I noticed a faint, damp footprint next to the bed. I decided to head home to grab some clothes and figure out my next move, but as soon as I stepped into that apartment, the air felt heavier. It was hard to breathe, like something was pressing down on my chest. The moment that I walked into the bathroom, I saw the mirror fogged up, as though someone had just showered in there, even though I hadn't been home. But I swear that I could make out in the condensation 3 words, and they looked like "don't fight it." I can't bring myself to sleep there anymore. The whispers have grown louder throughout the day, almost like they're trying to form words now. I don't recognize the language, but it's deep and guttural, like something choking on the sounds. It all came to a head a couple of hours ago, though, because I heard water dripping and thought that it was the kitchen sink, but when I walked down the hall, I saw a puddle forming. It led right to my bedroom, so I went in to check, obviously, and my bed was completely soaked. Sheets, mattress, everything. And in the middle of it was that hairbrush again. The same one that I've thrown away twice now. I don't know how it keeps coming back. I don't know how any of this is happening. I've kept all the lights on since this morning, but they've started flickering now. My phone battery drains faster than it should, and no matter how many times I check the time, it's like it just never changes. I called my parents earlier today, desperate for help, but the call dropped midway. When I checked my phone, the last call wasn't to them as well. It was to an unknown number. I don't remember dialing it. I don't even know how long the call lasted for. And so, right now I'm sitting in my car sharing this with all of you guys. I cannot bring myself to go back inside, but I can't stay out here much longer either. Every time I look up at the window, I see the shadow of someone standing there, I think, watching me and waiting. Something's going to happen tonight, and I don't know what it is, but I can just feel it. Whatever this is, it doesn't want me to leave, and I'm really not sure I'm going to survive even if I try. Whatever this thing is, it's not just haunting me anymore. It feels like it's taking me. Obviously, that's horrible to even think about, and quite honestly, I need to get out of here. So to give a little bit of a background, my whole life I've been sensitive to supernatural events. I've experienced a lot of unexplainable things, I guess you could say, and I always do my best to find a plausible or logical reason for things happening, and about half the time I would say that I do. My aunt recognized my sensitivity and taught me how to hone in on clairvoyance when I was a kid to help me to be able to decipher these situations as well. Believe what you will, but I'm confident in my abilities and experiences. So, fast forward to this past month. I was home alone with my baby. No dogs, as she had passed a couple of days before, or other people or other pets or anything. Just me and my tiny human. I live in a home with 2 levels, and I was in the bedroom in the basement finishing changing my kid's diaper when all of a sudden I hear people talking loudly upstairs. I rushed up and discovered my TV turned on and opened a streaming app that I never use. The remote was sitting upstairs on the kitchen island, so it was impossible for it to have been accidentally bumped by me or the baby. On another occasion, my dad was visiting from out of state to help my brother move, and he brought his travel water flosser that he had sitting on the bathroom counter. While my brother was brushing his teeth, my dad's water flosser turned itself on and shot a little bit of water out at my brother. This could be explained by a short from water getting into it where it ought not to be getting into. So this event has a potential non-paranormal reason, but it was still a bit weird. Nothing else happened during that visit though. On another occasion, my mother was visiting the next week for the holidays and staying in my guest room. One night she felt a presence around 3:30 to 4 in the morning. So she sat up in bed and suddenly the ceiling light turned on. This light turning on randomly in the middle of the night at that time, it's happened before, and I've chalked it up to the weird wiring in my house, until now that is. Today, I was reorganizing my pantry while my baby was napping. The light above me in the hallway flickered. I then felt something brush past behind me. Then my kid's pushwalker that I had turned off after the baby went down for a nap started making sounds. It has like a little fake phone on it, and it will ring and say hello, hello over and over again. That was the sound that it made, and I went to check it immediately, but it was still turned off, so I have no idea how that's possible. Then later this evening I did a smudging and cleared everything, and at the end I said that if anything is left in here that desperately needs to talk to me, and to switch my TV from what it is on now so that I know that I need to properly communicate. My smudge suddenly went cold though, and my TV turned off. The remote was on the counter behind me, and I was holding my baby, so again, there is no way that anybody bumped it. So, any 1 or 2 of these events happening, I normally wouldn't be concerned, but they're happening more frequently, and also other people are visiting and noticing things too. I even had an HVAC person come in and check my house for CO2 leaks yesterday to make sure that my guests and I are not being mildly poisoned, causing hallucinations, but there were no problems. All of my detectors are already installed for it and it's functioning properly. I plan on inspecting my house further for a reasonable explanation, and then I'll try to fully communicate with whatever it is tomorrow when I have a couple of hours alone. I'll definitely share any updates if anybody is interested, but I just felt like I really needed to share this and get it off my chest. So, thanks for coming to my TED Talk if you've made it this far. It all started in 2010. My then husband, Jay, myself and our 2 kids, ages 3 and 8 months, went to stay with his grandparents for some time. The house is on the bigger side, neatly kept, and was built in the 70s. We were due to stay for a month while we awaited moving to Japan, where Jay was getting stationed. His grandparents, although accommodating, could be very cold and critical at times. Keep that in mind. Now, my situation before going there, family troubles and alcoholism. I won't go into detail, but my parents were going through turmoil that I couldn't help with. It tore me apart and I was coping with drinking. So, Jay and I set ourselves up in his childhood bedroom on the 2nd floor, along with our 8-month-old daughter. Our son was set up in the room right next to ours. Our room was where most of the activity will take place, too. A few nights into our stay, I have a sort of dream of just a sound. It's the sound of a plate spinning on a hard surface until it finally comes to a stop. My eyes shot open and I look around the carpeted room, realizing that nothing in the room could make that sound. Thinking that it was just a weird dream, I turn over to see Jay, staring wide-eyed back at me. I whispered, "Did you hear that too?" And he replied, "Yes." We both went on to describe the same dream. Strange, but not scary yet. We told his grandparents about it the next morning. His grandpa said, "It's probably an animal outside just making noise," but we both knew that it wasn't. Later, when we were alone, Jay tells me about a similar situation that happened when he was a kid. He was in that room reading a book on his bed when suddenly he heard what sounded like a big dog scratching from inside the closet door, trying to get out. He ran, obviously terrified, downstairs to his grandpa, who went back up to check the closet. Nothing was there, and he told Jay that it was probably some squirrels on the roof. That story definitely gave me chills, though. Well, a couple of nights later, Jay and I are sleeping soundly. We are awoken by the king bed shaking violently. We sit up for about 5 seconds, and then it just stops. We don't know what to think about that. Nothing else in the room moved, including the tall bookshelf with a basketball, books, and other knickknacks on it. Jay goes back to sleep, but I'm wide awake wondering what the heck happened. We don't mention this to his grandparents, but while all of this is weird stuff and it's all happening, there's other things taking place during the day that are not paranormal but still troubling. Like, my 3-year-old son is hyperactive. Jay's grandparents criticize my parenting with snide comments. I tried my best to please them as a guest in their home, but somehow I just always fell short. I start to feel insecure and small, like I can't do anything right. Jay doesn't stick up for me, which makes me feel even worse. This is the point where I start feeling like something is around me, though. What I mean is that in certain parts of the house I felt fine, but as soon as I would walk towards the back of the house where the staircase to go upstairs was, I would feel like a change in the energy. It felt like something just gravitated towards me like a magnet. It would come right up on my back as I ascended the stairs, and when I got to the top of the stairs and went to our bedroom, I began to notice a heavy, dreadful feeling. This feeling plagued me from then on to the point where I had to talk to myself to go upstairs. Also, when I would shower, I felt like something was standing outside of the shower curtain.
I could, sense its presence so strongly, like it could see me through the curtain. And needless to say, I made my showers pretty quick. Well, as a few weeks passed, the feelings of dread turned into a nagging feeling like something really bad was going to happen. I couldn't put my finger on it, but it was a feeling in the pit of my stomach that I couldn't shake. Every night when I would close my eyes to sleep, it felt like something was leaning over inches away from my face, but I would open my eyes to see nothing. This happened so much that I had to cover my face with a comforter to create a barrier between me and whatever this was. I could never see this presence, I could only feel it though. At one point I almost wished it would show itself to me so that I could know that I wasn't going crazy, but deep down I knew that I really didn't want to see it. We had only a few days left to stay there, but then there was some bad news. Jay's command told him that they had changed the date for his arrival to Japan. We had to stay longer with his grandparents, about 2 more weeks. I was devastated, but tried my best not to show it. And it was during this time that the attack happened to me. On this night, the kids were already in bed. All of us adults were downstairs watching TV. Jay's grandpa began to talk to us about my son and how he handled him. Jay's grandpa turns to me and says, "When I watch you interact with your son, it reminds me of 2 drunks arguing at a bar." I felt the tears rise up and I had to excuse myself to bed. As soon as I got up in bed, I started to cry my eyes out. Jay comes up about 20 minutes later and I tell him that he should have said something to stand up for me. I'm doing the best that I can, and he says that he will say something in the morning, and he falls asleep. I felt helpless. I remember what happened next though, as clear as day, still 14 years later. You see, I looked up at the ceiling fan and in an instant it felt like my entire body jolted with a vibrating electricity. It took my breath away and I was frozen in a panicked state. I reached over and grabbed Jay's arm in an attempt to wake him, and I remember saying, "Something's happening to me," but he just didn't wake up. Then I felt thoughts trickling into my head that were not my own. It honestly felt like this entity was telepathically communicating with me using those horrendous thoughts. This evil thing was trying to compel me to do something horrible. I don't want to even say what it was, but I remember gritting my teeth and having a psychological battle with this thing, saying in my head, "No, no, no," and then it was just so strange, but I decided to combat the thought with a positive thought. I pushed the thought out by thinking of a beautiful bright sunny sky, and I also thought of God. Within seconds, I was released from this entity's grasp, and I suddenly felt normal again. Weirdly too, I just remember passing out, and I didn't wake up until the early afternoon the next day. But when I woke up, I had this intense full-body pain. Pain so bad that I started sobbing instantly. The tops of my feet, my hands, and my kneecaps felt bruised. I felt like I'd been beaten by a group of people. My entire body was pulsating with pain. I compare it to smashing your thumb with a hammer, that sort of pulsating feeling afterward. I felt that throughout my whole body. Well, after taking some Tylenol and drinking water, I was still in pain and I couldn't breathe properly. My fingers and arms started to seize up from a lack of oxygen, and they took me to the emergency room. After putting me on an IV, doctors took blood work and told me that I had nothing wrong with me. No sickness. I didn't dare tell them what I went through because I knew that they'd put me in a psych ward if I said anything. In fact, I didn't tell anyone. But I knew what happened though. I was oppressed and attacked by something unseen and evil. I don't know if it tried to possess me or what, but it sure felt like it tried and failed. But the result of whatever this was horrendous pain. Well, fast forward to a few years later, My mother was dying from an early onset of Alzheimer's, and Jay's grandparents asked me to come and stay with them for a few days. Honestly, too, I wanted to face this thing again now that I had renewed faith, and had also researched how to combat demonic or evil spirits. Me, my son, and my now 3-year-old daughter go to the house, and I decide to sleep alone in that room and set them up in the other 2 guest rooms. I walk into the room and set my stuff down, and I look around. I closed my eyes and said in my head, "You will not affect me. I have Christ on my side, and he will protect me." I went to bed that night and woke up the next morning with no issues. I go into my daughter's room to help her get dressed for breakfast, and she says, "Mum, there was a man by my window last night and he was talking to me." My heart sank and my body instantly went cold. I remained calm though, and I said, "Oh really? What did he say?" She replied, "He said that he hates you." I replied, "Well, I hate him too." And I changed the subject and ignored the energy around us. I haven't been back to that house in more than 10 years since Jay and I divorced, but my kids still go there occasionally to see their great-grandpa. My kids know to pray and guard themselves, and Jay, who I did eventually tell my story to, said that he would be on guard as well. My oldest daughter, the same one who saw the man standing at her window years ago, has had some experiences as well. Like one night she had a dream that she was stabbing someone with a knife and they grabbed it from her and cut her face. She woke up feeling like blood was trickling down her face, but obviously there was no cut. Another time, she was up reading a book late at night in her room when she heard someone knock on the bedroom door. She was still for a moment and didn't respond, but then she heard her great-grandpa's voice say, "Let me in." She slowly got up and opened the door to a pitch-black hallway because there was no one there. Jay's grandma has since died, and now Jay's grandpa is sick with stage 4 lung cancer. He's an atheist and he can be quite cruel at times. I have often wondered though if there's something attached to him, or if he invited this entity in. Originally, I thought it was Jay's estranged father who invited this evil into the house. His estranged father was disturbed. He was obsessed with dark things, and on the odd time that we did see him, I felt uncomfortable around him. He's dead now too, though. When Jay's grandpa dies, which may be soon, Jay is going to inherit this house, and I worry that he will not sell it and that him and potentially our kids will be fair game for this entity. I've thought about reaching out to Jay's grandpa and telling him what happened all those years ago, but I don't know. What do you guys think? What would you do? I don't mind jokes, but please do give me some serious thoughts and help if you can. I know that this is a bit of a long story, but if you've made it this far, then thanks for listening. So I live alone in a small college town, although I'm not a student or a faculty member or anything. My apartment is in a duplex on a residential street, just a few blocks from campus, of which most of the students have left for their winter break. Things get very quiet when they're not around, and late Wednesday night I woke up to a disturbing sound outside. It was somebody crying, but not in a normal way. This was more like a delirious wailing. The person didn't sound grief-stricken or panicked, and there were no cries for help or anything. Otherwise, I probably would have gone outside, cautiously, to check things out. This sounded more like somebody doing an impression of a ghost, but being a little bit too convincing. It certainly wasn't a pleasant way to wake up, and I got up and looked out the window, but I didn't see anyone. I couldn't tell where the sound was coming from, but after a few minutes the wailing grew distant, and things got quiet again. So I went back to sleep, a little bit unsettled. Well, Thursday night rolls around and I went to bed as usual, wondering if I would hear anything again. And sure enough, I was awakened a few hours later, but this time the sound was completely different. At first, I wondered if there had been a heavy snowfall because I heard what sounded like the edge of a shovel scraping the sidewalk. It was very rhythmic, 2 plodding footsteps followed by a long and drawn-out scraping. There were thuds and scraping, and I got up and looked out of the window where I saw no snow but a dense fog and a woman across the street. It took me a minute to tell if she was wearing some strange hat or not, but then I realized that the hat was her hair. It was long, down to her waist, and completely filthy and matted, bunched up in a single mass that looked like a gigantic glistening hairball. The woman was standing with her shoulders hunched forward and her arms crossed behind her back, like a figure skater or maybe a dancer. She was doing an unusual sort of dance as well, where she would take 2 heavy stomps and then glide as if she were on ice skates, but there was no ice. I couldn't tell how she was gliding so gracefully as well, and effortlessly across the pavement like that. It was almost hypnotic to watch, because she appeared to be elderly and frail, but she could spin, glide, and maintain balance on a level that would be hard for me to keep up with. Each time she would glide, I'd hear the scrape sound of her shoe against the pavement. There were no additional steps to the dance, just the rhythmic stomping and gliding, headed in one direction, before twirling around and doing the same steps in the other. After a few minutes of this, she stopped, and then stooped down like a runner at the starting line, dramatically leaned forward with her fingertips lightly touching the ground. She stayed that way for a good minute or two, and it was a very unsettling thing to see in the shadows and the fog. Then she slowly stood up, turning, facing away from me, and got up on her very tippy toes, and with her long skinny arms outstretched, she broke into that rapid sort of tiptoeing motion that professional ballerinas do. In my mind, I heard that classic cartoon sound effect that plays when a character scampers away, and without a sound, she danced into the fog, and after that, I haven't seen or heard anything from her since then. So this started about 2 to 3 months ago. I work in an art store and I do a little bit of everything, helping customers, cleaning, stocking shelves, etc. And one day this guy comes in asking for some help, as he never really took up art before, and luckily I was chosen to help that guy. We talk for a bit and I ask what he wants to learn, what medium he wants to use and such. He said that he's into sketching at the moment and wants to expand his horizons. I say, cool, I can give you a few directions and blah blah blah. And somehow it comes up that I'm also an artist, and he gets really interested and asks me if I can help him with art, which caught me off guard because that's a bit weird. I said that I'm not a professional and I'm not interested in teaching, and he took that well and off he went. Well, next week he returns again and specifically asks for me, and said that he brought his sketchbook this time, which I found a bit odd since I don't remember agreeing to help. He shows me some of his sketches, and I notice that he only draws K-pop singers, and I realize one of them is a member of BTS. I don't listen to them, but he pointed it out. He starts raving about BTS and K-pop and the like, which I'm like, okay. Apparently, though, I hit a sweet spot for him because nobody likes K-pop and I know of it. Anyway, he starts coming in now every few days, and I'm really disturbed by him. I also found out that he learned when my work schedules are and when my birthday is, my name, how old I am, etc. I only found this out because of a few encounters with said customer, and well, one day I clock into work and I see him waiting in the stairs for me, and he acts all surprised like, whoa, didn't know you were coming in so early. I could tell he was lying because he was sweating really badly and couldn't look me in the face. And for whatever reason, this whole situation just really creeped me out. On my birthday, he came up to me at the exact time I'm supposed to start my shift and gave me a gift, and a note as well. He drew me a member of a band that I like and gave me a birthday card, and told me that he wanted to bring me something a day before my birthday because he knew that I wouldn't come in the day of. Mind you, I never told him my birthday. He must have overheard me talking about it to my coworkers or something. I had insane amounts of anxiety, and I had to muster up the courage to act like I wasn't completely off-put by this guy. After he walked away, I looked at the note that he had wrote to me, which said, "Happy 20th birthday. Keep making people happy and being so kind. P.S. I'm not a paper thief, so you can have this back." Paper thief? And then I realized that the paper note was written on a piece of garbage that I must have thrown away months ago, which means that he had picked it up out of the trash to return it to me. That was a little bit too weird for me, and made my blood run a bit cold. He came in eventually and asked for some help like usual when he brought up buying something for kids, and because I wanted to know if maybe there's a wife or something involved, I asked, "Oh, how old are your kids?" Obviously, I also need to know to give him age-appropriate supplies, but he started freaking out and saying that they aren't my kids, I don't have kids, and I'm not married, and started asking me if I was married. I said that I wasn't married, but I am in a committed relationship and have been for 5 years. It was a lie, but he got very disappointed by that and just instantly walked off. Honestly, I was kind of happy about that as well, and I thought, well, maybe that was it. He didn't come in for 2 weeks, and honestly, I was pretty overjoyed, up until today, that is, because today he came up to me during work while I was busy and asked for help. He also asked where I was for 2 weeks, which really confused me, but also disturbed me a bit. I tried my best not to interact with him, and told my coworker to take over for me while I go hide in the back. She agrees and keeps him busy, and then he ends up leaving. After he left, she called me over and said that I could come out, and I asked, did he ask anything about me? And she looked at me with a concerned look and said, yeah, he did. He asked why you're so busy suddenly and when you'll come out, and if you're at work tomorrow and the like. Now I'm riddled with anxiety, and it's making me feel really anxious at work because, quite honestly, I'm pretty afraid to see him. Thankfully, he hasn't done anything physical, but it's putting a lot of mental strain on me, and I don't want to quit because I love my job and my coworkers. Also, it's pretty important to mention, but after the birthday incident, the moment that he left, I went up to management and told them everything about him, and that he creeps me out and I feel pretty unsafe. My manager said, "It's totally legitimate to go after a girl you like. That's what men would do back in the day. You should feel flattered." And the co-owner said, "It's all because women wear little clothes nowadays. It makes the men act up." But I have to conform to dress code, and I haven't even showed as much as a shoulder. Well, I told my parents and friends, and they're all on my side and think that he's a complete weirdo. Honestly, I don't know what to do about it, and it's really creeping me out, and I'm scared to encounter him again. But my question is, do I have a stalker? So I had an odd encounter tonight that isn't too dramatic, but was creepy enough to me that I thought that I would share it. So for context, I'm a guy working as a pizza delivery driver for around 2 years now. Usually I really enjoy the job. Sure, there's a creepy weirdo here and there, but overall most stops don't give me alarm bells like what I experienced tonight. Anyways, I drive up to this house and immediately get a bit of an uneasy feeling. The guy seemed friendly enough on the phone, but you never know in this part of town, and his voice was rough, like he'd been smoking his entire life. He doesn't come to the door at first, so I have a minute or so to glance through the door at the guy's living room. Usually I wouldn't be so nosy, but the inside front door is wide open, leaving only a rickety glass door between me and his living room. As I try and spot where he is in the house, a lot of the times we have to knock more than once, especially if it's an older customer. I notice that he has some photos above the kitchen door frame, directly across from the front door. Now, normally this is nothing, right? were it not for what the photos were of and how they were placed. The first two photos weren't framed and they seem to have been cut out of something. They're small and depict the same exact photograph. A grainy black and white portrait of a young boy, somewhere between the ages of 6 and 10. While it's weird that they were duplicates, what's even weirder is that they look like missing child photos. Specifically the kind that you would see on a poster from the 70s or the 80s. Think of missing kids photos like the ones of Ethan Pats, but specifically how they appeared on the old milk cartons, not just the original photos. At first I thought that they might have been missing person reconstructions. They were so grainy, flat and weird. But hung in between the two pictures was a little bundle of sticks. They reminded me of those scented brooms they sell in stores, except without a handle. On the other side of the bundle there was an old newspaper clipping with a woman who had a hairstyle from the 60s or the 70s, and just like the photos, it wasn't framed and instead just sort of taped to the wall. Now, before I could get a better look at it all, the guy came to the door and paid for his food. I left with a tip and I went on my way. Now, I know that there could be a myriad of reasonable explanations for the photos, and besides, I'm in college to go into writing. I've got an imagination and I've seen a serial killer story or two. I tried dismissing my initial gut feeling by wondering if it wasn't a memorial for a past friend or family member. He could also just be one of those people who tries and solves old cases from home or whatever, but the whole situation just gave me a very uneasy, sinister and disturbed feeling that I just cannot quite shake. I mean, if they were just photos, I wouldn't have noticed, but like I said, these were photographed like missing child posters. Not the kind of image you would stick on the living room wall in January, right? Even as someone who has a small vintage photo collection, my gut had a very negative reaction to them. I might be overthinking it, and I'm sure that there's an innocent explanation, but it is genuinely the first thing to creep me out on this job in a while. At the time of this encounter, I was 19 years old and I had just closed the store that I was working at with another co-worker. They drove home, and since I lived just right across the street, I thought that I was safe to walk home alone. After all, it was just a 2-minute walk to my apartment. The apartment that I lived in had an auto shop below the building, which my uncle owned, and it was around 9:30 at night, so it was pretty dark out. The roads were empty, and not even 10 seconds after I walked across the street, a dark blue minivan pulls up beside me out of nowhere. This kind of startled me, so I looked at the driver in confusion. I was carrying some bags of stuff that I'd bought from work, and the guy driving the van noticed and asked if I needed a ride. I kindly declined his offer and just told him that I just live a few minutes away, and so I continued walking. But the guy started slowly following me and continued, "Are you sure you don't need a ride? I don't mind." He asked, and again I declined and continued to keep walking. But he was persistent, and this started to creep me out a bit, so I started walking faster and ignored him as he repeatedly said things like, "Come on, get in the car." I was afraid to run inside the apartment because I really didn't want this creep to know where I lived, so I was going to just loop back around the building to lose him. Thankfully, that's when I noticed the auto shop's lights were on and the garage door was open, which meant that my uncle must have been working late in his shop that night. So I speed walked towards the open garage, and the van sped off in a hurry as soon as they were about to pass my open garage door. I told my uncle about what had just happened and waited a few minutes before walking back out to get into my apartment. I locked all my doors and windows, and I stayed in the living room until my dad came home from our cousin's house. Thankfully, I never did see that van again. I did finally buy some pepper spray after this incident though. I usually always had my weighted pocket knife on me, but I'd actually left it at home that day after using it to cut thick string from some crafts that I was working on. But to everyone out there, even if you only have a 2-minute walk to get to your destination, even if you think you're safe, please treat it like a 20-minute walk home at night in a really sketchy town. Always be on high guard and continue cautiously when going anywhere alone. If you, at any point, don't feel safe either walking alone and you have anyone like friends or family around that you know that you can trust, that they wouldn't mind giving you a ride or even tagging along with you, then don't be afraid to ask because, like me, it might actually just save your life. For context, I'm a dog walker living on the west coast of Scotland. It was a rainy, miserable day sometime in August, and I had about 5 dogs in my van to take on a group walk. And as it was rainy, I decided to take them to the beach as it would likely be empty on such a terrible day. As I turned off onto the quarter-mile track leading down to the beach, I caught up with another car that was driving down there as well. I'll admit that I was a bit peeved because I was hoping to get the beach all to myself, but there are 2 boys, separated by a load of rocks that you cannot cross easily, with 2 separate paths leading down to them from the car park of this particular beach. So I figured that I'd let these guys park up and see which bay they wanted to go on, and I would go into the other bay. As I followed the car into the otherwise empty car park, I immediately pulled into the first space on the right, whilst the car that I was following appeared to carry on driving right to the end of the car park, about 30 to 40 yards along. It's a small car park, more of a field, but whatever. So I turned my engine off and looked out of my passenger side window, and the car was still driving along. I gave it a minute and leaned over to look out of the window again, and the car was just inching forwards, as if it was finally about to stop. I waited a bit longer, expecting to hear the sound of a car door opening and shutting, but I didn't hear anything. So I leaned forwards and looked again, and the car was still inching forwards as though it was just about to stop. It had seemed to be just about to stop forever at this point, but it didn't strike me as odd yet. I was just getting impatient, wanting them to get out and pick a beach and leave me to myself, and anyway, at this point the dog started to whine a bit. Presumably a bit confused as to why I just parked up and sat there and not letting them out, I suppose. So I decided to get out and open the back doors of the van to placate them. They're crated, so they wouldn't be able to jump out or anything. I got out and walked around to the back of the van, glanced over to the car that was still just slowly pulling into its car parking space. At this point, I'm still not thinking anything is off. I just thought that this was the slowest driver in the world, and I'm getting a little bit impatient, and I just want to get on with this and have a busy day. After glancing at the car, I opened my back doors, roughly would have taken about half a second probably, and looked back at the car again, and it was just gone. There was no sign of it anywhere. Now, even if they moved at lightning speed, there is no way out of the other end of the car park. The only way out was the way that we both came in, which would have required for the car to turn around and drive past me. And I know that this wasn't possible because, 1, there simply wasn't enough time for it to have turned around and drove past in like half a second. 2, I would have definitely heard it do so, as it would have been driving along the track about maybe a meter behind me. And 3, I would have seen it driving back up the quarter-mile track that we'd just driven down, and I looked back up there, and I can assure you that there were no vehicles. It's hard to convey just how impossible this actually is without you fully understanding the layout of the beach car park, but believe me, this is just not possible, which is exactly why I'm here. Does anyone have any idea about what happened here? The closest thing that I can come up with is a time slip. However, people usually report feeling strange or losing time and also going back significantly in time, whereas I felt nothing but irritation as to how long the car was taking to park. Though in retrospect, the fact that I glanced at it several times over the course of about 2 minutes, and it was always just pulling up into its spot every time, is a bit strange, I'll admit. The car was pretty modern. It was a Ford Mondeo estate car with a roof box on it. I didn't make a note of the year, but I would say definitely under 10 years. on a positive note, I got the beach to myself, I suppose, but do you have any idea as to what the heck happened that day? So last month, my sister and I moved into this old house from around 1890. It might have been 1860, I cannot remember, but since moving here, there have been some strange things going on that, for all I know, could just be coincidence or easily explainable. The first is our backyard light. It has a motion detector on it, and it often is seen to turn on for no reason when I'm looking at the window. It could just be a malfunction, but I don't know, especially considering one experience that I had, which I'll share in a minute. But the second thing is that on many mornings I come downstairs to the kitchen, I will find several of our cupboards wide open. This could very well be a result of the house being so old and possibly drafty. It never seems to be the same ones. In general, there isn't any pattern. Also, none of the doors feel loose at all, and they all feel tight and even have magnetic latches, so it just doesn't make much sense. But one really unsettling occurrence, though, has to do with our basement lights. We have a basement that has those short and wide windows that go out to the ground level, and we see them from the outside. And on several occasions I've gone out at night, seen lights shining in the windows, not reflections. I looked closely and they were definitely the basement lights. Then go back inside to find that the lights are off again. But one creepy experience that I had was when I was feeding my sister's dog. The dog's food bowls are in the small mudroom or coat area, whatever it's called, that leads out into the backyard. There's a closet adjacent to the back door containing the dog food. It was late at night and I went to grab some food for the dog, and as soon as I opened the closet door, I just felt the best way to describe it is a strong presence, and suddenly got really nervous. Ignoring this, I reached in there and it was really cold. Not like the air was cold, but it was almost like a physical thing was there. Something that I was touching that was making a portion of my arm ice cold. When I turned around to put the food into the dog bowl, I got a sudden chill on my back. It felt like something moved into me from the closet. The scariest part, though, was that right as that feeling faded, the motion detector light that I mentioned earlier suddenly turned on, as if whatever was in the closet moved out into the backyard. Now, this next bit is leaning into the realm of wishful thinking, but I think that it's worth bringing up. So my sister claims to sometimes see apparitions, auras, and shadow people, etc. Ever since she had a near-death experience, that is. The primary reason that I believe her, too, is because of an incident at our old apartment. You see, I was in my bedroom in bed with my cat when he started staring at a spot directly above where my head rested, as if something was there. He stared at it for several minutes, and soon after I got up to grab some water, my sister was still awake and I commented on my lack of sleep. She happened to peer into my bedroom and said that she apparently saw a dark floating figure in there, at the exact spot where my cat had been looking. Anyway, back to this house. My sister has claimed to see several different apparitions in the house of various forms. During a recent night, every time she entered my bedroom, she would get startled and jump back, saying that she saw, for a split second, the figure of someone standing right beside my nightstand, in the corner next to my closet. Also, in relation to my bedroom, I sometimes hear this loud scratching coming from inside my walls, but only in one spot next to my desk. It could very well be a mouse, though. I'll try to get a video of it sometime, and if I can, I'll be sure to update you guys. But on one particularly creepy night, I was hanging out in my sister's bedroom watching TV with her when she said that she saw something outside her sliding glass doors that lead to the backyard. She described it as smoky and dog-like. Moments later, too, the motion detector light flicked on. Well, that was coincidence enough for me. I closed the curtains to help her feel better, but she seemed pretty disturbed and asked me to not go to bed. It was around 3 or 4 in the morning at this point. I stayed for a while, but soon enough, more weird stuff started happening. I heard a noise like paper being scratched on the other side of her bed, and there was indeed paper there, but it stopped moving, I guess you could say, as soon as I looked at it. Then as I walked away, I swear that I felt something poke me in the spot right above my left butt cheek. Yeah, I know, it's ridiculous, and I joked about it to make myself less scared, but still, it was petrifying. And, well, that's about it so far. All of this has been happening over the month or so that we've lived here. And if you have any thoughts on everything, or if you think that we should do anything, then please do let me know. I'm also curious to know if anybody else here has had any similar experiences, and if you did you do anything about it? And, most importantly, did it work? This happened to me about a month ago or so. I've been thinking about this experience a lot recently, and a friend of mine recommended that I share it here. This experience, it has kept me up at night recently, and the more I think about it, the more unexplainable it gets. So it was a Saturday, and I enjoy filling up my car on the weekend before the week begins. I needed to get gas, and before I left the house, I told my dad that I would be back in a few minutes. I just needed to go and get some gas down the road at my local Kroger, because it's like 3 cents off the gallon, and would be back shortly after. Anyways, for some reason I have an overbearing dad who refuses to believe that I know how to pump gas on my own, even though I've been doing it for like over 6 years. I leave the house to get some gas, and as I mentioned, the Kroger is right down the road. I have to make a massive left turn to get into the area, so I like to drive all the way around to avoid that massive turn, aka making a 2-minute drive into a 7-minute drive. As I'm making the drive about 3 to 4 minutes in, I notice my parents' car approach me and begin driving close behind me in my rearview mirror. Their car is unique as the color is specific, like grayish blue. I roll my eyes as I'm thinking, wow, they seriously think I cannot get gas on my own and am following me to make sure that I can? I approach a stop sign and quickly check my side view mirror to get a closer look, to make sure it's actually them, obviously annoyed. In my mirror, I see it's my parents driving. I know that it's my parents, and there's something off that I notice about them, though. Their expressions are completely blank and just seem, well, empty, I guess. It's hard to explain, but it had to be my parents, but like, all the energy from them was just gone. They look like NPCs, for a lack of a better term. I decide to shrug it off and keep driving just the last stretch to the Kroger. As I turn into it, I notice my parents are no longer behind me, though. I pull up to a pump and pull out my phone to check my parents' location, and weirdly it says that they're at home. There was no way that they had enough time to make it back home from where I had last seen them on the road, though. I finished pumping gas and make my way home, still very confused by the encounter. Later that night, I ask in a sort of laughing manner to my mum, "Hey mum, why were you and dad following me earlier?" She looks at me super confused and says, "What are you talking about?" I explain what I saw on my way to get gas, and she replies with, "Dad and I haven't even left the house today." I have to preface this by saying that my parents are incredibly religious, conservative, straightforward people, and would not prank me like this, nor would they lie about it. So I know with absolute certainty that they did not leave this house. Which begs the question, who or what was following me that day? Back when I was maybe 19 or 20, in college, I lived in this 5th floor apartment that had one balcony, the door to which was in my bedroom. I had a nightmare of some kind. I don't remember what it was about, but I woke up to a voice saying loudly and firmly, "He's out there," with a sort of mental nod at the balcony. The bizarre part was that I immediately knew what he looked like for some reason, and became that level of terrified that is, like, one shy of wetting the bed sort of thing. Scared enough that I felt the blood drain from my face, and the back of my mouth tasted metallic from the adrenaline. There was a window next to my balcony door, a little bit taller than waist height. The he was crouched out there below the window, just out of eyesight except for the top of his head. Had I been able to see the rest of him, he would have been dressed in filthy clothes with long greyish stringy hair and an unshaven face, and sort of gnarled old hands with yellowed fingernails. He had broken black teeth, and he was rocking a little bit because he believed I was about to open the balcony door, and he was waiting anxiously to do something to me. I was not asleep, but looking back, I wonder if the nightmare that I'd been having before something woke me up somehow blurred into real life, and my brain just couldn't tell the difference. I could move, so I'm not sure if it was sleep paralysis, but I know that there was nothing out there, and I know nobody said he's out there because my roommate wasn't home and there wasn't a TV or radio on. I don't know what actually woke me up, but all I know is that I laid there and tried to slow my heart rate, but I kept panicking every time that I saw the sliver of the top of his head move or heard some kind of fabric shifting against the brick outside. Anyway, I realized suddenly that the door actually was unlocked. I never locked it because, well, 5th floor, right? I was young and stupid, but in my defense, I still figure the odds of anyone getting a ladder or something tall enough to scale a 5-story building to hide out on somebody's balcony, well, was pretty much slim to nil. In any case, it took me about 10 minutes of laying there, sweating and shaking, trying not to make any sound at all, scared out of my mind, before I could actually get the courage to sit up and move, and reach across the 3 or so feet to the door to turn the deadbolt. What is bizarre, though, is that when I did, I looked out the window and there was nothing there. Logically, that should not have surprised me. Again, 5th floor. Unlikely that anyone would randomly climb up there somehow. But for some reason, the fact that he was not out there, it did not calm me down. Mostly because, well, one, I might be crazy. I mean, what had I been staring at that was moving that I thought was the top of his head? Or worse, 2, he was somewhere else now, and I did not know where, but it could be through my roommate's open window for all I know. In any case, I was terrified and literally sat in my room paralyzed with fear. I didn't call 911 because I wasn't about to tell them something that insane, but I probably should have, right? I stayed locked in my room until my roommate came home a few hours later, and to this day I really have no idea what that was, why it happened, or even really what happened at all. I just remember that it was the most afraid that I have ever been. So this happened a few years ago when I moved into this old house in a small town. It was super cheap, probably should have been a red flag, but I didn't think much of it at the time. The guy who owned it before me, he had died, but he was old, so I just figured normal stuff, right? The first few nights were pretty chill as well, but then I started hearing footsteps in the hallway late at night. I live alone, by the way, but I told myself that it was the house settling or something dumb like that. But the sound kept getting louder, like someone walking back and forth right outside of my bedroom door. Finally, one night, I was like, okay, enough, and opened the door with a flashlight, but there was nothing there. But weirdly, the air that was there was freezing cold. Like so cold that it made my breath fog up, and it was the middle of summer. Stuff started getting weirder after that too. Doors would open on their own, lights would flicker even though the wiring was new, and the mirror in the bathroom. Sometimes I'd see a shadowy figure behind me, but when I turned around there'd be nothing there. Then one night, at 3 a.m., I heard whispering downstairs. It sounded like multiple voices, but real low and creepy. I grabbed a baseball bat and I went to check it out. Stupid, I know, but when I got to the living room, there was an old man just sitting in my chair. I swear that he wasn't solid though, like he was kind of blurry around the edges. I instantly froze. I couldn't move, couldn't even breathe. After a few seconds, he slowly turned his head and looked at me, and his eyes were just black. No whites, no pupils, just completely black. And then he smiled, but it wasn't normal. His mouth stretched way too far, like almost ear to ear. Well, I noped out of there quickly, grabbed my keys, ran to my car, and I just drove. I left everything behind, and I got someone to pack my stuff the next day, and I sold the house as fast as I could. I lost a lot of money from that, but to be honest, I didn't care. Sometimes, late at night, I still think that I hear footsteps. I don't know if it followed me or if it's all just in my head, but either way, I'm never going back to that place. I just want to start off by saying that I was and still am mostly very skeptical about paranormal stuff, but I do believe a little bit now. So I watch a lot of investigator YouTubers like Sam and Colby, and I've seen the equipment that they use. I've also seen some others use apps on their phones, but I've always felt that phone apps could be easy to fake. So I thought, I know how to code, and I wonder if I could program my own app. I managed to get the code working, and basically, how my app works is that it picks up either a tap on the screen or the phone physically moving. There's no EMF or anything. It's actually just physical touch, but when it picks up one of those two, it randomly selects a word from a huge list of words and displays that word. I couldn't get the text-to-speech to work, so it just pops up the word up on the screen. Anyway, I sent the build to my phone and began testing it. I waited a while, but this was the first conversation that I had. I asked, "Is anyone there?" and my phone responded with Josh. I said, "Hello Josh, who are you?" and my phone said, "Father." "Oh, are you a father?" "No." "Oh, are you asking me if I am a father?" "Well, yes I am." Then my phone responded with wife. "Wife? Do you mean my wife?" And then my phone said, "Danger." Well, at that I immediately closed the app, pretty freaked out, and went to check on my wife because, well, that was weird. My wife at the time was also heavily pregnant and was due any day. Every time my wife had been pregnant, I have had a fear of her dying in childbirth, so when it told me that my wife was in danger, that close to giving birth, it really got to me. Well, that weekend, my wife went to the hospital and gave birth to our daughter, but during the birth, she, my wife, lost a lot of blood. So, seeing that message freaked me out even more. Everything was fine and she's alive and well, but still, it freaked me out. Now, going back to when I was testing the app's movement detection sensitivity and trying again to get TTS to work, I must have messed up somewhere, but after I sent it to my phone and started it, it went nuts and cycled continuously through words, too fast for the TTS to say what word it picked up, but it did stop on 3 words and said them. And those words were demon, acknowledge, and me. As soon as I heard it say those words, I did not react audibly. I calmly picked up my phone, closed the app, and went back to making adjustments to the code. I have limited demonology knowledge, but I do know that if a demon asks for acknowledgement, you do not do it. I'll admit as well that I have not even opened the app since this happened, and now I'm really worried that there might be a demon in my house. My wife and I moved into a newly built house in a housing estate in the west of Ireland 5 years ago. It's a very bright, modern home and has a good overall energy. However, very early on I got a creeped out feeling when putting things in the closet or storage in the attic. The attic is fully converted into a bedroom with a full bathroom, and it was done at the time of the build. Proper stairs, dormer window, etc. It's not dark and it's pretty spacious, to be honest. The closet is right on the attic landing, so it's right in the center column of the house, meaning that it's surrounded on all sides by other rooms, bathroom, landing, my office and a crawl space, and it has no windows. Where I used to sit in my office, the closet was over my right shoulder, and I used to feel something touch my hair on that side. It was as if someone was flicking a single hair very lightly. After a few months of this, I moved my desk to the opposite side of the room, and now it happens over my left shoulder, a direct line from where the closet is behind me. No windows on that side of the room, no heaters, and it's always the same place. I've also heard, well, talking. It's more like 3 conversations all layered on top of each other at once. It's only for a second or two, so it's just whispered gibberish, but the second that I turn around, it always stops. I tried ignoring it, until one night, my wife said that she felt like someone was watching her at night from our bedroom walk-in closet, which is right below the closet in the attic. Again, it's fully surrounded by other rooms with no windows, and she said that she just couldn't fall asleep with her back to it either. Another night, I was going to bed. I usually stay up later than my wife because I work from home, and I noticed a shadow, or more like an absence of light or a void, on that landing. I actually walked past it, and when I turned around to take another look, it stood up and swooped towards me and went up over me. It made me take a step back in a defensive reflex to it. And at this point, my wife and I had been comparing our experiences pretty regularly, and when I told her of this, she was really creeped out. She told me she forgot that one night she woke up and something was at the foot of the bed, and when she sat up, it apparently did the same thing, swooped towards her and upwards and then disappeared. There's been other things too. We've heard the sound of our bedroom shutters opening when we're downstairs. That distinctive sound of the magnet opening and then folding and hitting the wall. I go to investigate, but they're closed and nothing is out of place. Also, our shirts get 3 tiny holes, always in the same place, that we just cannot explain. It started out that just my wife's shirts would have 3 perfect holes in a triangle to the left of center near the bottom. Not pierced holes, but just perfect tiny circles in a triangle. Always the exact same pattern and shape. I thought that it was something that was catching on her at work, or her car seatbelt, or the washing machine or something. But then, after 6 months, it started happening on my shirts and t-shirts as well. We've switched cars multiple times. We obviously don't wear the same belt. I've checked the kitchen counter for something that we might catch on when, doing food prep or washing up or anything like that, but really, there's nothing. And I have no idea what is causing it. Also, my wife sometimes gets bruises on her legs and arms as well. Not just like in the morning or whatever, but she'll notice a huge bruise form while we're sitting and watching TV that definitely wasn't there at least an hour before this. Anyways, a few nights ago I saw it again, just in a ball in the corner, but only visible when you didn't look directly at it. Hard to explain, but that's the best that I can do. It used to be concentrated in the center column of the house, but now it seems to be on both sides of the room, which really has never happened before, and the whole situation seems to be escalating. I'll admit that we're reluctant to do anything to get rid of it, in case it gets worse than what it already is. But should we? It's not an evil feeling, I guess, but it is weird. The void figure is certainly weird, and it seems to be showing up more often.
I was around 7 to 8 years old. I'm 39 now. I was in my granny's house watching TV. It was only me, my gran, and my older cousin that were in the house, and it was a Sunday at around 3 p.m. I remember this because every Sunday the football results would be announced on TV, and my older cousin would always lay on the floor with a notebook and write them down. Don't ask me why, but they just always did it. And anyway, I used to hate when the results were being read out, so I decided to leave my gran's house and head back home. So I said goodbye to my gran, never said anything to my cousin as he was busy laying on the floor, writing his results down, and I walked into the next room, the kitchen, where my gran had a walk-in cupboard where the jackets were kept. I opened the cupboard, saw my green jacket hanging up, stepped inside the cupboard to pull the jacket off the hook, and suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me, locking me in there. In pitch-black darkness, I fumbled around and grabbed the round door handle, turned and pushed, but nothing. It honestly seemed like somebody was on the other side of the door holding it shut. But then, and for the unbelievable part, I start to hear a low, deep noise, kind of sounding like those guys that do the throat singing thing. I don't know what it's called, but then like a male voice whispered softly in a sort of Arabic language. I'm now screaming, crying, punching and kicking on the door, and it's still not opening. The voice in the low sound is still chanting away in the background. I'm panicking like crazy by now, and my heart is beating out of my chest. I then lean on the floor with my shoulder and push my feet on the back wall, and then the door suddenly flies open. I stumbled forward and fall onto the kitchen floor. And when I do, I suddenly look around, and there's no one there holding the door. In my head, I was convinced that it was my older cousin that was playing a prank on me, so I run back into the living room, and my cousin is still laying on the floor in the exact same spot, writing his football results down, and my gran is still sitting in her chair, and they both sort of look at me like they hadn't heard a thing. My gran saw that I was distressed and asked me what was wrong. I said nothing and put my jacket on, and I walked home, and I never told anyone what happened. For years, this has played in my mind, and the whole event must have lasted only maybe 30 seconds or so, but inside it felt like a lifetime. I'm certainly not a superstitious kind of person, but this 100% happened to me, and I cannot explain how I got locked in there, as there was never a lock on that cupboard door to begin with, and it was only ever a round turn handle, but most of all, I just cannot explain that noise and the voice that I heard. I don't know with being a kid if it was just my imagination playing up on me or something to that effect, but to this day I still cannot explain what happened. So, what do you guys think? To start this off, I live in southern Minnesota, in basically the middle of nowhere. For privacy's purposes, I'll be using fake names, and it was around 9 p.m. when this took place. So, I was with my friends Ali and Ella. We were driving around in my golf cart and went to a spot where I would normally hike. It was sort of a large valley, I guess. Not sure how else to describe it, but it was an abandoned construction zone that was never finished. We were exploring in the open, just looking for cool rocks to take home. There was some sort of a bird that kept following us. Every time we would approach it, it would go fly away, but the second that we would keep going, it appeared again. It just wouldn't leave us be, but we didn't think too much of it. It sounded almost like it was making warning calls, perhaps, but Ella thought that she had heard a man's voice but brushed it off. This is actually pretty important to what happened next, but we decided to head to the other part of the valley, which was close to a nearby river. It was basically a clearing surrounded by trees with a big mound of dirt and rubble in the middle. We stopped because I had said that there were always some cool stuff to find there. So I parked the golf cart, and right as we were about to get off, I get this overwhelming feeling of danger and feeling of doom. It felt like my stomach had dropped to the floor. Then Ella points at the top of the mound, and on the top was some sort of creature just standing there.
It was tall and skinny, short hair, coyote-looking ears, short neck and abnormally long body. It was too small to be a deer, but way too big to be a coyote. It stood there too, just sort of staring at us. It didn't move, and I froze completely, unaware of my friend screaming at me to drive away. We all had a very strong feeling of danger and fear, and we just had instant bad vibes that something was wrong. Eventually, though, I caught myself and I quickly hightailed it out of there, and when we were driving away, it just sort of stood there, slowly turning its neck as we drove past. I would like to stress too that whatever this was, it was not a deer. I got a pretty good look at it, and it wasn't anything that I'd ever seen before, in fact. We are speculating that the bird was a warning sign and we saw something that we really weren't supposed to see. We're pretty much in shock and we have no idea what to do about any of this, so if you have any ideas as to what we should do, then please do help us. I'm sort of losing my mind over this, and I just don't know what to think and don't know what to do. So my friends and I, who I'll refer to for anonymity's sake as A, E, S, and D, have been getting into paranormal investigations over the past few years. We aren't professionals by any means, nor do we claim to be. It's just something that we enjoy doing whenever we're able to get together. We've gone to a few supposedly haunted locations and done some investigations, but nothing prepared us for what we experienced here. So one day, we were discussing where we should go for our next paranormal investigation. We had just finished another investigation a couple of nights prior, so we were still feeling pretty brave from that. As we were discussing where we should go, one of our friends suggested that we should check out this old abandoned school in rural Tennessee. We had heard stories about this school from videos on YouTube, and from just online searches as well. If you know the story about the boy who was bullied to death and buried underneath the floorboards, then you'll know what school that I'm referring to. If you don't know the story, then here's a brief summary. A young boy was cornered in the boys' bathroom at this school by a bully, apparently. The bully beat him up so badly that he ended up succumbing to his injuries and died on the spot. The bully, in a panic, realizing what he had just done, decided to pull up some of the floorboards with his pocket knife and stash the body underneath them. Because of how brutal it was, it is said that something very dark and malevolent is haunting the school, as well as the boy. Some even speculate that this dark spirit is what drove the bully to take it so far and kill the boy in the first place. Sadly, our friend A wasn't able to come with us on this investigation, so I invited another one of my friends, who I'll refer to as H. H wasn't really into the paranormal, I guess you could say, like the rest of us are, but agreed to come anyways, just to hang out and have something to do. So we all got into our cars and drove to this school, hoping to have some paranormal experiences and maybe even catch us some paranormal evidence that we could show off online. When we got to the school, we quickly realized that the pictures and the videos that we had seen online did not do the real thing justice. It was really creepy. The entire place was covered in shrubbery, vines, and graffiti. The windows had been busted out and the doors were off their hinges, presumably from all the local kids looking to get a rush by breaking into and exploring a creepy abandoned school. We walked around the school and eventually found the entrance to the basement, which apparently you are not supposed to go into, especially the boiler room. Not just because the whole building was on the brink of collapse, but also because that's where it primarily lives. So, of course, that's one of the first places that we wanted to go. We walked around the basement and did some exploring, just to survey the area and to get a better idea of where we wanted to begin our investigation. We eventually did find the boiler room, and at first glance it didn't seem like anything special, just some broken down equipment, graffitied walls, trash thrown all over the place, and a random school chair sitting in the corner. E laughed at some point and made the comment, must not be a very powerful spirit if this is where it has to live. We all let out a bit of a chuckle in agreement, and continued on our way through the basement. Thinking back now, that may have not been the best comment to make about this thing and its home. We exited the basement and went into the main area of the school. The main area? It really wasn't any better than the basement. Graffiti and trash were everywhere. The ceiling was falling in, the floor was collapsing in some areas. We explored the halls eventually, some classrooms, the gym, and we even found the bathroom where the bullied boy was supposedly buried underneath the floorboards. After exploring for a little while longer, we decided to start our investigation proper. We set up a couple of cameras, motion sensor lights, and voice recorders in some of the classrooms, the hall, and the bathroom. As we were doing our investigation, 3 of us were in one of the classrooms, while myself and H were in the hall right outside. The 3 of us that were in the classroom, we were just playing around with some dowsing rods and a spirit box. If you don't know what dowsing rods are, they are basically 2 copper rods that can spin freely, and they're used as a way for spirits to communicate with you, either by crossing the rods or pointing. The spirit box, that's a device that quickly cycles through radio waves and allows spirits to talk through the frequencies. Now, as they were asking their questions in the classroom, myself and H, we were staring down the hall. At the end of this hall is what we assumed was a staircase, but we couldn't be too sure because we couldn't reach that area due to the floor having collapsed. As myself and our friend were looking down this hall, we suddenly heard a loud bang come from the far end where the staircase was. We quickly shined our lights in the direction of the noise, but we didn't see anything. We kept watching for a minute, just in case something or someone came out. But after a couple of minutes of nothing, we sort of just assumed that it must have been an animal or a rat or something like that. Eventually, I made my way into the classroom with the others while H stayed in the hall. As we were asking our questions and hoping for a response through the dowsing rods or the spirit box, I noticed H in the hall. He was all of a sudden ghostly white and fixated on the area where we had heard the noise prior. I asked him what was wrong, if he was okay, to which he says, "I don't want to freak you guys out, but I could have swore that I just saw someone poke their head out from around that corner and look right at me." We were all kind of like, "Oh, it's probably just your mind playing tricks on you," but he was still very insistent on what he saw. Now, we had seen and heard things during our investigations before, but something about the way H looked had us all a little bit spooked now. H insisted that we move on to another area, so we obliged him and went back to the main foyer where we had entered. We were standing there talking about where we should go next when we hear what sounded like a child's laugh coming from the classroom where we had just been. We all instinctively shut up and froze in place. Finally, our friend S broke the silence. What was that? Eventually, he built up the courage to go and see what it was. He started making his way back to the classroom when something told me that it really wasn't safe for him to go back in there. I quickly grabbed his arm and said, "Hey man, I don't think that that's a good idea." To which he brushed it off and proceeded to head towards the classroom. A split second later, we heard a loud crunch and a crash come from the room, so we all ran to see what it was. When we reached the classroom, we were horrified to see that the floor had collapsed right where we had been standing moments earlier. Had something not told me that it wasn't safe, I wouldn't have grabbed his arm, and honestly, he probably would have been at the bottom of the school right now. If not dead, then at least very hurt. As we stood there, in shock of what had just happened, we began to feel, I guess, very grateful that the floor hadn't collapsed while we were all standing in there. We decided that, honestly, that was enough of the classrooms, and we made our way into the gym. The floors felt much safer in there, that's for sure. We continued our investigation, and thinking back now, we probably should have left after our friend almost died, but we were dumb and we wanted to go on. I took the dowsing rods and began asking those generic questions. Is anyone there? Can you tell us your name? Etc. Eventually I asked the question, Can you point to where you are? And to my surprise, the rods pointed in the direction of the darker corner of the gym. Guys, come here, I shouted to my friends. I think I'm getting something. As my friends came closer, the rods began to move as well. Now they weren't pointing in the corner anymore. They were seemingly following E. Now might be a good time to mention too that this is the same guy who almost fell through the floor, and the guy who made the silly comment in the basement about this thing's home. I'm not saying that he was being targeted by this thing, but it sure seemed like it at this point. It was weird too, because no matter where he moved, the rods, they seemed to follow him. He went left, they followed. He went right, they followed. He ran around me and they followed full circle. This creeped us out beyond belief, so we wanted to know why the rods were following him. As we asked our questions as to why the rods were doing this, someone eventually asked, "Are you mad at him?" And then, in an instant, the rods went straight and unnaturally still, and the room, it felt really eerily quiet. So quiet, in fact, that it was as if we had fallen deaf almost instantaneously. I got this insanely bad feeling as if something very evil had just entered the room. I get goosebumps thinking about this. A few seconds later, I felt something strong physically grab the ends of the rod in my hands. Whatever was grabbing them began thrashing them back and forth with enough force to move my whole body, as if they were trying to break them from my grip. As this was happening, noises started coming from all around the school too. It sounded like doors and lockers were slamming, things being thrown down the halls and all around us, and screaming. Though admittedly the screaming may have been coming from us, but it didn't help our situation by any means, that's for sure. We were all terrified. We had never experienced anything like this before. Then H, the same guy who saw the thing at the end of the hall, pointed in the direction of the dark corner of the gym and let out a guttural, blood-curdling scream. We didn't even bother to look and see what he was pointing and screaming at. The only thing in our mind at this point was get out. We all quickly grabbed our things simultaneously and sprinted out of the school back to our cars. We got in and we peeled out of there as fast as we could. Eventually, we met back at my place, still obviously shaken up by what had just happened. After taking a while to process this experience and decompress a bit, we asked H what he had seen. And he tells us that as everything was going on, he looked into the corner of the gym and saw something horrifying. He described it as seeing a massive thing, probably 7 feet tall, standing in the corner. It had allegedly unnaturally long arms that were spread out wide. Its head had long devilish horns, and its mouth was open so wide that you could probably fit your head into it. He said, though, that on top of that, on its unusually large mouth, was also a smile, more evil than you could ever imagine. And knowing that something like that was so close to us, honestly, is just bone-chilling. In my opinion, we were lucky to make it out alive that day. But we've never returned to that school, and we have no intention on ever going back to. As far as we're concerned, if that old school was demolished and the rubble was burned, they'd be doing the world a favor. Maybe it would destroy, or at the very least trap whatever that thing was in there for good. If you know the school, then I highly suggest that you never go inside, or even go onto the property, in fact. Honestly, save yourself from the trauma. Believe what you want, obviously, but that night for us will forever be burned into our minds. So, to give some context, this story takes place at a campground where myself and others have had some strange experiences, but those stories are going to have to wait for another time. When I was around 12 years old, though, I accompanied my father to our family's longtime campground where he was going to perform some lawn care work before the camping season began later that month. We were probably going to be there for a while, so I asked my dad if I could invite my friend to come with us, just to keep me entertained while he finished up some mowing. To my delight, my dad agreed and said that he could come. For privacy purposes, I'll be referring to my friend as D. Now, D and I had been friends for years at this point, and had many of the same interests. Among those common interests was our curiosity for the unknown and the paranormal. So while my dad was busy mowing, I suggested to D that we should try to do some EVP recordings in the cafeteria, just to see if we could capture anything, to which he happily agreed. The cafeteria was a 2-story cement and brick building, with the upstairs being where the kitchen and dining hall were, and the basement, otherwise known as the dungeon. It was an old dorm that was being mostly used for storage at this stage, with a very big and dimly lit storage room as well, a long hall, a smaller storage room, and a rather large bathroom. The whole atmosphere down there always gave me the creeps too. Anyway, myself and Dee made our way into the dining hall and sat down at one of the tables. We got out my old flip phone and started using the voice recording app to see if we could catch any voices or other unexplained sounds. We took turns asking questions and waiting for responses for about 5 minutes, but to no avail. Until we heard some noises coming from the dungeon. We discussed going down there to see what the noise was, but we chalked it up to being an animal, since it wasn't very uncommon for animals to get into the buildings at this campground. So for the most part, we just brushed it off, I guess you could say. We continued with our makeshift EVP session for about another 5 minutes, until we heard another noise coming from the same dungeon. But this time, we both froze in place. We looked at each other in shock, and, what were we hearing? My friend looks at me and says, "Is that chanting?" At this point, we were both pretty freaked out, and we decided to exit the cafeteria and just go on a walk. As we were walking, we were speculating what the sounds we heard could have been. I did my best to come to some logical explanation as to what we were hearing. There was no way that there were people down there, but we would have seen or heard them beforehand, right? As we continued our walk, we ended up about 60 yards from the backside of the cafeteria, where we could see a door with a window that led into the dungeon. We both looked at the door and didn't see anything weird, so we kept walking. I made the mistake of saying to Dee, how scary would it have been if we looked at the door and saw someone looking back, as a bit of a joke. And immediately, I kid you not, after saying this, we both looked back at the door, fully expecting nothing to be there. But to our horror, something was there. Not just something, though. There were multiple people. I instantly froze in place, terrified of what I was seeing. There were 3 people that we could see, and they appeared to be in what looked like cloaks of some sort. But 1 in a red cloak and 2 in black on the other side, staring directly back at us. One of the scarier parts, though, was that I never even saw their faces, just the hoods that they were wearing. Before I could even ask D if he was seeing what I was seeing, I looked to see him in full sprint down the road about 50 yards in front of me. So instinctively, I started running too. We ran to tell my dad what we had heard and seen, to which he pretty much brushed it off, but said that he would go and check it out just to ease our minds. Now, my dad is not a man to be messed with. He was a 6'5" cop and almost 300 pounds, so just his sheer size would be enough to pretty much intimidate or scare someone off if they were trespassing. My dad went and checked the dungeon as we watched from a distance. He came back out saying that everything was fine and he didn't see or hear anyone in there. We were still a little bit freaked out, but glad that he had said that there was nothing to worry about and nobody was there. So we continued with our day until it was time to leave, but we definitely steered clear of the cafeteria. Flash forward about 8 years, and I had mostly forgotten about the whole thing. But one night, my older brother, who was older than me by about 7 years, and we were up late one night, sitting on our parents' back deck, just reminiscing about the times that we had growing up. We eventually got to talking about spooky stuff that had happened to us, and that brought us to talking about our experiences at the campgrounds. I proceeded to tell my brother the story about Dee and I seeing and hearing the people in the cloaks in the dungeon. My brother then gets a sort of very perplexed and somewhat scared look on his face and says to me, "You're joking, right?" To which I said, "No, I wish I was. You can ask Dee and he'll tell you the same thing." My brother, getting more and more freaked out by the story that I'm telling him, proceeds to tell me something that, honestly, has haunted me to this day. He tells me that when I was about 2 years old, apparently a satanic cult had broken into the campground. The cultists had gone through every dorm and the church, gathered all of the Bibles, and taken them to the field, which was directly on the other side of the road from where myself and Dee had seen the people in the window. He tells me that they had burned a massive pentagram into the field, piled all the Bibles in the middle, and allegedly set them on fire. The next day, a couple of workers had gone to the campgrounds to do some regular maintenance, and they had found what had been done. They called the police, and according to my brother, they not only found the pile of burnt Bibles inside of this massive pentagram, but they also found the remains of dead animals all around it in a sort of ritualistic pattern. Nobody had heard or seen anything more about the cult since then, until I told my dad and my brother what Dee and I had experienced. Flash forward to today, so 11 years since what we had experienced, and nobody has heard or seen anything else that we know of anyway. So, did Dee and I just imagine what we had experienced, or did we happen to interrupt another cult gathering of some sort? After hearing what my brother told me and comparing it to what we saw, I find it hard to believe anything other than the latter. I was about 13 when this happened. My parents were gone for a weekend for a trip together and left me and my 2 siblings home alone. Our grandma was a minute down the road if we needed her, and my sister was 18 at the time, so it really wasn't a big deal for a night or two. I was in the spare bedroom, which had a couch, TV, and Xbox 360 in it, that I was really into playing or used to watching Netflix on. It was the summer of 2015, by the way. I was watching some random show. Knowing me, it was probably The Vampire Diaries at the time, and it was maybe 9 or 10 at night. And that was when I heard it. 3 knocks on the window. I ignored it at first, just thinking that it was a little bit weird, and just keep scrolling through the memes on my iPod and watching TV when it happened again, which is about the time when I started freaking out. The windows in the room had curtains over them, so I didn't see who it was, but I knew that I needed to get out of there now. I went to get my older sister and told her what was happening, and as I moved through the house, the knocking on our windows followed me, knocking 3 times every single time. She and my brother heard the knocking on the glass too, and started freaking out with me. My sister had me and my brother hide in the corner of our kitchen that doesn't have any windows looking in, and made sure our front door was locked. We called our parents and then our grandma. They had us call our next door neighbor to take a quick look around. He was a Vietnam vet in his 60s at the time, and we knew that he had guns and training if needed. But he didn't find anything. We were all unsettled the rest of the night, but we knew that our parents were coming home the next day, so we weren't too worried. Fortunately, everything was okay, and it never happened again. But to this day, about a decade later, it still bothers me not knowing who it was. I have 3 theories, which was progressively less probable, I guess. It could have been a man that was doing horrible things to me through the summer or winter, but I don't think he'd be bold enough to get that close to my house, not knowing who was home. That's a whole nother story. And the final option was my biological father, who was barely in the picture at the time. Again, I don't know who it was, but the whole thing was really creepy, and I'm glad that my sister was there that day because, honestly, I don't know what I would have done without her. We've had our cabin in the mountains since 1966. It was my father's heaven on earth because he grew up close by and had to leave home at a young age to go to VA school for the deaf and blind. He had detached retinas. Anyway, he died in 1995 of leukemia, but made my sisters and I promise that we'd take care of the cabin before he passed. In 2005, my sister who lives in Texas called me on a Saturday, asking if my other sister and I were at the cabin. I said, no, but we're going next weekend. Why? And she said that she had gotten a missed call from the cabin landline on her cell phone, called back and no answer. I was like, it's possible our uncle was over checking on stuff, but I'd cancelled long distance service a few months prior because we only used the phone for local calls and to have in case of 911. So I thought maybe they took it off the bill, but LD was still active on the phone. I called the cabin number and no answer, so called my uncle's house. He answered and said that he hadn't been over there since the last time we visited, but he'd go check on it just in case our neighbour was over there for a problem. It's a remote house and you have to go through the neighbour's land to reach it. After a while, he called back saying that apparently nobody was there and he had tried to call me from there but couldn't because there was no LD. He also checked with our neighbour and they hadn't been there either. I called my sister back and I told her that it couldn't have come from the cabin because our uncle hadn't been there and he verified that LD wasn't working anyway. She was adamant though that it came from that number, said that it was in her call history even. We both ended up half-jokingly saying that it must have been Daddy calling her. When we hung up, I laid my cell phone down beside me and said out loud, "Daddy, call me." Sounds stupid, I know, but I felt jealous that he would call her and not me. And I kid you not, my phone immediately rings, and the screen says unknown caller. I was like, oh heck no, thinking that this couldn't be happening. With chills and bumps on my arms, I picked up and I could hear nothing but static and what sounded like several people's voices from far away. I kept saying hello, hello, but just could hear nothing but static and those faraway voices. After a few seconds comes this loud voice like someone had the receiver right up to their mouth, but it didn't sound like my father, saying like mimicking the sound of a buzzer going off when a wrong answer is given on the game show or whatever, sort of like gotcha, and the call disconnected. I called my sister back immediately, absolutely freaking out at this point. She said that it has to be Dad trying to warn us that something is wrong. We really didn't know what to think, and it almost felt like we both had imagined it all, but we could see the calls on our phones, the call history. But she said maybe he called her instead of me and my sister because she would have paid attention to a VA number, living in Texas, whereas my sister and we might not have paid attention. She insisted though that we check everything out when we went back up there, and was convinced that he was trying to send a warning. The next weekend, my other sister and I went to the cabin for our already planned trip. Our uncle always goes over and opens up the house and starts a fire, so it'll be warm when we get there. When we arrived that day, he said that he decided to clean out the flue, and good thing I did because it was full. Only had an opening of about an inch. That thing could have burned down the house, you know. To this day, we are convinced that our father was warning my sister about the chimney flue being blocked. It still gives me chill bumps when I think of the phone calls, but I kick myself for not taking screenshots of them. I do that automatically now for, well, so many things, but 20 years ago, not so much. If it had only been me, I know I would have thought that I must have dreamed it, because it just feels, well, really surreal, I guess. Almost like living in a time warp. I was 19 at the time, around 2009. I had a weekday off work. I decided to go to the beach by myself and brought my guitar along. This was rural Northern California, where the beaches are below cliff faces and usually empty of other people. Now, there was a particular beach where someone had built a driftwood hut into the side of a steep cliff, with the beach below about maybe 100 feet. You can just barely see the roof of the structure from the highway. I'd always wanted to check it out, so I parked my car on the highway and made my way along a narrow trail to the hut. It was a beautiful day, so I set up near one of the hut's windows and was playing my guitar and watching the waves. Suddenly, I hear someone else walking down the trail. I'm a little bit nervous, but figure that it must be well known to locals or something. But then enters the man. Immediately, I get a major creepy vibe from him. He's in his late 50s, overweight, unshaven, thick glasses, sloppy, dirty clothes, sweatpants and a dirty white shirt, but not homeless or anything. He immediately initiates conversation with me. First, just sort of nice pleasantries, talking about the view, the weather, but then he starts asking personal questions. Like, do you live around here? Do you go to college? Are you working today? Are you here with anyone? I answer very vaguely and am starting to get uncomfortable and feeling sort of trapped. The hut is very long and narrow, and there's no way for me to get to the trail leading back to the car without passing by him. At this point, I only say the bare minimum, trying to show him that I'm really not interested in conversation. I look away and he suddenly snaps a picture of me on his disposable camera. I ask him what he's doing, and he says that he wants to show his friends back home how beautiful the girls in California are. At this point, I start brainstorming my options. I could try to run past him, but I will have to get close. I can jump out the windows of the hut towards the ocean, but it's a pretty steep cliff face to the beach, 100 feet or so below. My gut started telling me that this was a dangerous situation, but I was frozen. I didn't know what to do. Then he tells me that he needs to go to his truck to get something about his camera, but I knew that he had already used his camera. He leaves the hut, but there's still no way for me to get to my car without passing him. I'm brainstorming what to do, but I kept thinking maybe I'm just overreacting. I quickly run to the entrance of the hut, but he's already making his way back down the trail towards me. And this is the gross part. He has a very large and very visible, well, you can probably guess, in his sweatpants, and he also has something under his arm. I quickly run to the opposite side of the hut and jump out the window, sitting on the ledge of the steep cliff. And in that split second, where I had to make a decision, I look in the sky and see two hawks fighting each other. I had just read The Alchemist, and if you remember, the universe sends the main characters omens and signs. One particular omen in the book is two fighting raptors, which ended up meaning something bad was coming and to run. I took that to heart for whatever reason, and in that moment, I knew that I had to scale the steep cliff to the beach below. I decided that I'd rather die falling or die swimming across the river. The beach below was also the estuary to a large river, than find out what that creep was planning. So I started scaling the steep cliff. He ran to the edge and asked where I was going. He yelled for me to come back. Adrenaline kicked in so hard that I made it down surprisingly fast without falling or even getting hurt. Luckily, he didn't follow. He stood there the entire time yelling for me to come back. I was visibly shaking when I got down to the bottom. I made it to the beach and hid in some vegetation for what felt like forever, but was probably only 20 minutes. I finally decided that it was safe to walk down to the beach where the actual trail was. I could see a man standing at the top, and it wasn't him. I could tell by the silhouette, but I was still terrified that he had an accomplice. I decided to risk it and run up and ask for help, and it, luckily, ended up being a park ranger. I quickly told him the whole story. We walked to the hut, and by this point, the creep was gone. He put out a radio call so enforcement would be on the watch out, and I filed a police report in the end. Then I left abruptly, and I left my purse and all my stuff in the hut. When I left abruptly, I left my purse and all my stuff in the hut. It was still all there when I returned with the ranger, but I was terrified that he went through my belongings and saw my address or my ID or whatever. For months afterward, too, I was honestly scared to be alone at home. Honestly, too, I genuinely think that the creep, he would have done something awful if I had stayed in that hut that day. I think he might have gone to his truck for a weapon or a rope or something, but I'm not sure since I couldn't see what he was tucking under his arm. At 19, I didn't know to trust my gut. These days, I know not to worry about what anyone thinks if I feel danger and the need to bolt. I'm not religious or anything too, but I thank the universe for sending me a very clear sign at such a pivotal moment. In the end as well, nothing ever came of the report, but sometimes I search for that town name in crimes in case I ever recognize his mugshot, because something tells me that this was not his first or last time trying something like this. Back when I was 5 or 6 years old, in the mid-80s, we lived in Rutland County, Vermont. There was a marshy area behind our house, separated by a small wooded area. I remember almost every night for about a couple of weeks waking up to strange lights in the wooded area behind the house. My room, it was on the second floor of the house, facing the rear towards the wooded area, and I could just see the edge of the marshy area through the trees during the day. My parents' room was directly across the hall, facing the front of the house. Now, I remember going into my parents' room and telling them about the lights, but my mum would always send me back to bed without checking. I got so scared that I'd hide under my bed when the lights were happening, and it was around this same time that I started seeing small, bipedal creatures that stood about 2.5 feet tall, with large black eyes, coming out of the woods and seemingly trying to get into the house. When I told my parents about them, they would say that they were just bad dreams and not to worry about it. Almost every night, though, after seeing the lights, they'd come out of the marshy area, or wooded area, try to get into the house, and I'd hide under the bed, too scared to do anything else. Eventually, the lights stopped, and they stopped coming out of the woods. But my parents still think that I was just having reoccurring nightmares, but I can assure you that I was wide awake and I was not having bad dreams. So my uncle was put into an asylum last year because, well, he swore that he saw his brother, my father, in the kitchen of the house that we all share together. My uncle, myself, my mum, my little brother, and our cousin, my uncle's kid, all live in one house together because our family is kind of poor and we can only afford one house between the lot of us. My dad, he worked for the army, so he was deployed to different countries a lot. We hadn't seen him since just before Christmas, which we had to celebrate a little early that year due to my father's departure the day before Christmas. About a month had passed since my dad was deployed, before my uncle shouted his name happily from the kitchen. Me, my brother, and my cousin rushed into the kitchen to find my uncle stood there, alone and sort of confused. "Where is he?" my brother asked. "He was right here. He just... I swear he was," my uncle replied. Moments later, there was a loud knock at the door. My mother actually answered it, to find another soldier outside holding my father's uniform and tag necklace. My mother didn't cry, at least not then. Her wails echoed every hallway at nighttime, though. She just wanted to be brave in front of the kids, I guess, myself included. But my father was dead, so how could my uncle have seen him? Nobody spoke to my uncle for weeks after this. They thought that he saw the soldier coming down the pathway to our front door and made it all up as a sort of sick joke that he thought his brother might have found funny. My uncle, though, went crazy in the weeks that nobody spoke to him for. Absolutely insane. Like, he muttered to himself, he lashed out at everyone, he roamed the streets at night shouting and causing a fuss, telling random strangers what he saw was real. Nobody believed him, though. 2 police officers brought him home to us the night before we decided to put him into an asylum, for everybody's safety, him included. When we left the asylum, though, the following day, after leaving my uncle there, We arrived back home shortly after this, and I looked over at our kitchen window to find my father shaking his head at me. I instantly froze in my tracks, rubbed my eyes, but when I opened them again, he was gone. So, what the heck happened to me that day? Was my uncle telling the truth? I've never really told this story to anyone because, honestly, it still gives me the creeps many years later, and I'm afraid that people will think that I'm crazy for it. This happened back in 2018 to 2019 at my college apartment at the University of Northern Texas, UNT. This was student housing right outside of the IOOF cemetery, which is a couple of blocks long, and many students will cut through to get to campus. I shared my apartment with my roommate. Her name was Em, on the top floor. When you walked in, there was the kitchen and then the living room further in. We each had our own bedroom, mine to the left and hers to the right of the main space. Our personal rooms had separate locks, because we were technically paying separately like two dorms. Her room touched our neighbors, and the back wall had a sort of window facing our view of the pool and the cemetery. My room touched the outdoor hallway or breezeway, and also had a window on the back wall facing the pool and the cemetery. Both rooms also had their own bathrooms and closets too. Also, we were not able to get into each other's personal bedrooms because they had separate keys from the main apartment key. Now, one of the first instances happened on a weekend for me. Em usually went home, and I sometimes stayed at the apartment to study, hang out, etc. This instance, I walked in and I noticed her light was on and heard movement all inside of her bedroom. I called out to say hey and told her that I was there, but there was no answer. I didn't think too much of it and continued doing my own thing. Em later texted me asking if she had left her charger there, meaning that she wasn't there. I definitely freaked out at that and ended up getting someone from the apartments to come and check her room because at this point I suspected a break-in or something crazy. And well, in the end, no one ended up being in there, and I ended up going back home to my house early. This continued for weeks though, where I would see her lights turn on and off when she wasn't there, both during the day and the night. What was much worse though started happening about halfway through our year there. Now, my bed faced away from my bathroom and towards the outer window in my room, and at night, I would start hearing my toilet flush, like multiple times a night. My dad and the apartment staff both ended up checking it, but nothing appeared to be physically wrong with the toilet itself. When this would happen, I started checking the time, and I noticed that it would always happen between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m. in every instance. Shortly after the flushing started, Em and I both would hear knocking too. It always sounded like it came from the outer wall, overlooking the pool and the cemetery, rather than the inner wall against the hallway. It would always be 3 knocks too, again at night time as well. Em had brought up that she was hearing it, and that honestly made me more nervous because it meant that I wasn't just dreaming it up after being freaked out by everything else. To me though, the scariest part happened right before we moved out for the school year. Thankfully, we only had a few weeks left at this point, but around that same window of time, I would hear a baby crying. At first, I would wake up and assume that, well, maybe it was like 10 p.m. and a neighbor would have brought her baby out to the pool or something to not wake up anyone inside. However, once I got brave enough to check everything out, I realized that it was much later than that, like 3 a.m. to 5 a.m. I asked Em if she heard it too, and she told me yes, but only once or twice at this point. So, one night we ended up staying awake until 3 in the morning to see if we could hear anything, and we heard the knocking, but no crying this time. However, the next day our AC went out. Not sure if that's related or not, but Em and I both heard the crying the next couple of nights after this. Em and I ended up doing some research about attachments and cleansing the apartment after this. We only had a couple of weeks left, but we honestly didn't want the next girls to have to experience this too. Em was a little more knowledgeable about all of this, and she did a sage cleanse and bought a crucifix for the door as well or whatever. And after these cleansings, the electrical issues, knocking, flushing and crying, amazingly, they all stopped. We only had 2 weeks left at this point, so I'm hoping it truly was gone from the apartment for the next tenants. Ultimately, Em and I kind of drifted apart after graduation and COVID, but it was definitely a bonding experience when it happened. I'm hoping she's doing okay and free of any attachments like we experienced. I'm also sharing this here to see what you guys think it could have been, and also if we did anything right or wrong with the experience. I'm also curious if anyone knows anything about the cemetery and area in Texas, so please feel free to share if you do. I appreciate you guys listening, and I hope that maybe this story could potentially help someone else out there. The experience, it definitely still scares me to this day, so please be kind, even if you think that all of this is just baloney. This is one that still spooks me to this day, especially knowing my dad and just how unusual it is for him to believe anything spooky. Now, this was probably around 2006 to 2007. At the time, we were living in my hometown, a tiny rural town in a Virginia valley, surrounded by the Appalachian Mountains. My dad, he was the youth pastor at our small church, and we were living in the parsonage, which is a house owned by the church, which houses one of the pastors. It was in a rural area of the community, surrounded by farms and cornfields. It always creeped me and my 3 siblings out too. But there are so many other instances that I could share, which explains why all 4 of us now jokingly refer to that old house as haunted, even though we don't really believe in ghosts, but this one still lives in my mind. So one night, my dad was up late working on a sermon, sitting on the couch in the living room. My younger sister, about 6 at the time, walked out of the room, presumably sleepwalking, wearing a white t-shirt of my dad's. She walked into mine and my sister's room that we shared, and she just never really came back out. My dad got up to get her and bring her back to bed, and when he got to our room, he realized that somehow she wasn't in our room. He looked everywhere too, the kitchen, the laundry room, etc., trying to figure out where she went. Eventually, he went into her room she shared with our younger sibling, and there she was, still asleep in her bed, wearing purple pajamas. My dad has 2 masters in theology, and is still a pastor to this day, and he has no explanation for what he witnessed that night, and it really weirded him out. The only reason I know about this story is someone at our church told me the story one time. I asked him about it, and he confirmed that it was true, and that he never wanted to tell us because he didn't want to scare us, and he knew how scared we were in that house already. It's definitely one of the weirdest things that we've encountered, and honestly, I hope to never hear something like it ever again. This happened to me recently, and I am genuinely creeped out. I'm a woman, and I was trying to get rid of my ex's stuff. Everyone told me to do Facebook Marketplace, so I did. I listed a lamp for $5, I just wanted it gone, and this guy contacted me asking for it, then told me that he was going to come and get it, but he's driving from an area about 30 minutes away. I made a mistake. I put the lamp right outside of my door because I'm a coward and I lied about an emergency that I had to leave for. But I think that my lie just saved me from something really bad. You see, I have a door camera, and I watched as 3 full-grown men walk up to the lamp, stand there for a few minutes, and then walk off. On the video, they were talking and sounded sort of upset that they came all this way for nothing. They left, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe they really did just want the lamp. But still, why travel so far for a lamp, right? And why bring 2 friends? Also, I just rewatched the cameras and they looked under my doormat and took a picture of my door as well. I'm not going to ever let anyone come to my door like that again, and I feel really dumb about it. But what's done is done, and I guess the lesson is learned. I'm just wondering if there's anything that I can do about this. Should I prepare for them to come back at some point? And if so, well, what should I do? When I was around 9 years old, my father was fixing up our house with 2 rooms on the left, a hallway in the middle, and another room and a bathroom on the right. And one night, he took off all the doors, leaving just curtains in their place. While I watched TV in their room, I heard my dad from the living room asking me where I was, claiming that he saw a dark shape of a kid run from my room to theirs, right to left, and that he saw the movement on the curtains as well. He brushed it off, thinking that it was just the wind or our imagination. But later, my sister, 8 at the time, said that she saw a snake-like shadow outside of her window. I asked her for more details, and she said that it was something big, not a snake, but it moved like one. I thought that she was making it up, and then we went to bed. But after like 5 minutes of turning the lights off, my sister screamed and started crying. I could hear my parents asking her from their room what's wrong, but she wasn't answering. So my dad asked me to go and check. I guess he was scared or whatever. So I go from my room all scared and picked her up on my arms and take her to mine. The next morning, my mum asked her what happened, and she said that she was awake, looking at the ceiling, and then she realized there was a figure, like a weird shape there. When she finally was about to see what it was, she said that it was seemingly a kid with sharp teeth and horns, and the kid jumped on her. A lot of things like this kept happening to her until she was, I don't know, maybe 16 or so, where she would see things right after someone else saw a shape or whatever. And then all of a sudden, after 16 years old, everything just sort of stopped. It was a weird night, that one, and I'll never forget her screams and just how honestly scared she seemed. This was about a year ago now, and I still think about it a lot. So I was laying in bed next to my partner. We had both fell asleep around 10 or 11 that night, which was kind of out of the ordinary for us because we're normally night owls. I want to preface this too by saying that neither of us do any sort of drugs, drink, and have both not really even smoked weed since like November of 2022. In other words, it had been at least a month or 2 at this point that neither of us had smoked. Now, have you ever had one of those dreams like inside of a dream? Well, this was one of those. I didn't think that I was sleeping, but I certainly was. I turn over and check my phone. It's around 2 a.m. and everything seems real normal, but then the door opens, and it has to have opened only enough for a person to slip in and out. I open my eyes in the dream, and I see what appears to be a man that's around 8 or 9 feet tall, standing at the foot of my bed. He leans over my partner and stares at him dead in the face, but while standing there, just slowly gets closer and closer, and gets so close that it's like he was about to kiss him. The odd part is that he's still at the edge of the bed and his body is leaned over the bed. We have a queen-size bed and it's raised. Humanly, this wouldn't have been possible is what I'm getting at. I try to move, but it feels like these bricks are on my chest and I'm just completely stuck. My partner, on the other hand, I'm hearing him make uncomfortable sounds in his sleep, like something is wrong, but I can't wake him up. I began using the only bit of strength that I had left in my body to tap my boyfriend with my hand. We're laying backs flat side by side and I'm on the edge. I finally am able to pull myself out of it. I wake up as he stands straight up and moves toward my side of the bed, my eyes now open. He sees me and he looks as if he's moving from the end of the bed to the side of the bed where I'm at. Then I raise my body up and it's weird. It was kind of like I scared him, if I was to put words to it. But he slowly walks to the center of the room. He's facing away from me now. and then this figure in less than 2 seconds just vanished into thin air. Our room door is